We could call the meeting to order. The roll call is going around, the sign-in sheet. Tonight is a public comment night, so if there's I don't have any cards up here, but if there's anybody from the public that wants to speak, now is the time to do so. Seeing none, we'll move on.
What's that?
Public comment.
The information, the postings. I'm sorry, we just got those on today, so if you were expecting those sooner, I apologize for that, but it was a lot of information. It's in your handout today, and it's quite
He may move because
quite thorough, but these are the questions that you asked last time that were posted. Howard, my fault. I thought I had included your email to me in those. I didn't. I will have it posted tomorrow. Your email is the list. So, oversight on my part.
I think in Phoenix. Oh, you know, you're sick.
You have in the packet also the. Well, let's go ahead with the first thing, the approval of the minutes, if we could. They are in your packet. If we can get a motion to approve those minutes. Those also include, by the way, if you haven't looked at them yet, they include the items, not a summary like Howard did, but they include all the items that were discussed as you went around the room at the meeting on the 10th. If you want to take a second glance at that, and when anyone's ready, make a motion to act on those, if you would, please.
Where's the minutes? In here, I guess. Okay.
I move we accept the minutes as distributed.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. So you have the posted material today. We have the Citizens Budget Committee meeting dates, which we are on the 24th. We have the ballpark tonight, the budget, the FY11 budget, and we'll consume a good bit of tonight's meeting. But starting next week, we've got a much shorter presentation schedule, and then wide open time to begin to more specifically identify what you want to put in a report. Now, last time, I think Joan suggested that Mike and I work together so that you have a committee member and me working on a draft report to bring back to you. We didn't conclude that discussion. I think we should. That would be fine. We could make that work just fine, but I just need to know that that's the desire of the committee if we're going to go forward in that fashion. And any way we do it is fine with me. So, Joan, is that you still want that question to be addressed?
I would.
Do you want to repeat your motion?
Well, we can do it when we get to our discussion period. If that's, I mean, we're now going to have presentations.
You are going to have presentations. If you want to wait till then, that's fine. I have here a list, and we will get this to you as soon as we've concluded tonight's presentations and added a few more points to it. And what it is it's the list that I mentioned at the very end of the meeting, which is a compendium of all the divisions, simply a list of the names of all the divisions that we've heard from. And so it just gives you a memory jogger, if you will. that we can then put on a grid and get back to you from the standpoint of doing prioritization of services, this might be particularly helpful. Again, just as a memory jogger.
Dick, would it be possible that, Joan Shield, would it be possible that we could kind of change our agenda around and have the ballpark go first and then city manager and finance go together? I mean, they kind of are together.
Well, I think the city manager is the finance president discussion tonight, and I think he's counting on going first. And that's kind of the way we've got it set up. Can you tell me the reason why that
Well,
would be?
because on the agenda you have, where is it? I just had it here. That the ballpark and then the budget update and potential costs, or it seemed like there was something else about Larry Lang, that he was going to tell us what was the difference on the budget.
Yes. The city manager is going to cover that. The city manager is going to cover the budget material this evening. And then if there are questions beyond that, ask the questions and we'll certainly have answers for you. But John's going to give that presentation. If it's okay with you, Joan, we'll start with that. If there's something missing, we'll fill it in. Let us know what it is that's missing, what you need, and we'll go from there. But the intention tonight on this schedule is that John would make the presentation, status of the budget for 9-10, and then the budget for 10-11, which we said we'd bring back so that you could have a discussion after the discussion with the council so that he could share with you the cuts and the suggestions made for the 10-11 budget, which we couldn't discuss before.
Well, I thought that Larry was going to explain to us from the financial point of view what the difference was, why he could not give us a clear-cut answer.
You'll have the information about the relationship of run rate in the second half of the year to the first half of the year, and what the difference is and how things occurring in the second half of the year impact the end result in the 9-10 budget. Is part of what the city manager, if I understand it, that's part of what the city manager will discuss. But if there's, as always, if there's questions unanswered, please just bring them up, and Larry's here. We'll do what we have to do to get you the answers. If it's all right with you folks, we'll go ahead and start with the city manager's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Hello, everyone. I'll try to be brief this evening, and I will go over run rate versus the second half of the year and stuff. And if you want to get into more detail on that, we'd be happy to have Larry come up and explain it. What I want to address tonight is basically the fiscal year 9 and 10, the operating budget revenue estimates. Fiscal year 10 and 11, the revenue and expenditure estimates. The 5-year forecast, operating budget, and deficits for fiscal year 10 and 11, and a summary. Basically, the things I'm going to discuss tonight are: 1, the target; 2, the $4 million, where did that come from? 3, the structural deficit, and I want to make sure that we all, whether we agree or not, we all understand what terms we're using as far as deficit, structural deficit, and things like that. 3rd is the run rate. 4th is what am I doing this year in the budget, and I will share some of that with you. This is the budget schedule that we're presently following. You'll see right down about halfway is March 22nd. That's the work session kickoff date. That was this last Monday with the City Council. Then we have April 12th, revenue and expenditures, and then April 19th, if this fits in your schedule, we have the work session with the Council, the Citizen Budget Committee recommendations. May 10th is a work session presenting the draft budget and the capital improvements program. May 24th is adopting the tentative fiscal year 11 budget. And in Arizona, once the tentative budget is approved, that is the budget. You cannot exceed that amount, as I understand it. you can come in lower, but you cannot exceed that amount. And then you adopt the final budget on June 28th, and the tax levy is adopted on July 12th. And then the council goes on vacation for a month and a half. It's frozen. There, folks. Okay. This shows the general fund revenues actuals and estimate. We have $66.1 million in 2006 actual, $91.1 million in 2007. 2008 went back down to $78.8 million. 2009 was $62.8 million. And 2010 estimate is $59.4 million. Some of you may recall that we had used a $50.4 million figure earlier. That is due to debt and transfers. That's why it's $59.4 million. The historical ongoing budget cuts over a 3-year period, fiscal year 10-11 budget. In fiscal year 17, we had spending reductions of $3.6 million. Fiscal year 8 and 9, reductions of $3 million. Fiscal year 9 and 10, reductions of $6.8 million. And then mid-year this year, we've had mid-year budget reductions of $800,000, and further mid-year reductions, projected salary savings for positions that I have frozen this year, which is $1.5 million. So we have cut $15.7 million over this 3-year period. The operating budget for the projected fiscal year 10 and 11 impact, we have possible increases to the budget of elections of $130,000. That's not really a choice. We have to have that. Health insurance cost increase, about $450,000. We now have that down to $400,000. Workers' comp coverage increase, $120,000. Inspector's position, we issued permits so far this year, 377 single-family house permits. We had, I think it was 264, somewhere in that range. So we've had a third increase in the number of single-family homes. So we had to add an inspector in this year again. We had 7 inspectors at the height of the go-go years. We reduced that by 4, so we were at 3 inspectors. And so we've added back 1 inspector this year. Telephone system lease payments is $635,000. That will be somewhat less, but we have $635,000 in there right now. And that's, we had planned to do a phone system with our new city hall, with the city center, but since we aren't proceeding with that now, we have to budget that in this next year. The phones are not kept up by the vendor any longer, so it's a system that really is on its last years. However, we are making do with it because we have cut number of employees. Park and Ride, the council approved a new Park and Ride Monday night. A contract for, I think it was in the neighborhood of $6 million being built at our temporary Park and Ride over in the Lowe's area behind Chuck E. Cheese, and that operating cost will be $120,000. And increased water rates, this is the impact on the city for the right-of-way, parks, facilities, things like that, between Lipsco, which has filed for a 110% increase in that neighborhood. They're going through hearings right now. We certainly don't anticipate that being at 110%, but probably I think this figure assumes that it will be at 70% or somewhere around there. And then our own rates increased slightly this last January, so that will cost an additional $475,000 for the city. Reductions we're looking at right now, fiscal year 9 and 10, mid-year reductions that are sustainable are $780,000. And then the fiscal year 9-10 frozen positions, which are also sustainable, will be $1.5 million. Then we're looking at additional commodity reductions of roughly $1 million. And then I'm looking at suspended employee benefits, longevity pay, vacation cashing program, and the health savings retirement account. I believe those figures are, longevity pay is about $104,420. Vacation cash in cost savings with fiscal year 10 will be $97,999. And the health savings retirement account estimated savings next year would be $127,312. I'm taking a look. I have communicated with the employees that we are considering not funding those for next year's budget, so that's something that will be cut in addition. New revenues that we're anticipating, increased revenue projections from a full-year sales tax collection. As you'll recall, we had, I think it was 9 months collections this year, so we have to add some additional for the additional collection, and that'll be a full year, so it'll be $1 million. User fee study implementation will be $55,000. We also are looking at several other areas. One, as I've told you before, looking at the fire protection for Litchfield Park, which will be in the neighborhood, I think I've said in the neighborhood of $450,000, somewhere around there. We have actually submitted a proposal to the city of Litchfield Park, and they are considering it very favorably and will be getting back to us sometime in the near future. And also, we're also looking at an idea that some of you had suggested. We're looking at the electronic billboards and the options that we have along I-10 to do that if the city council chooses to do it. Right now we're preparing a paper, Harvey Krause has prepared a paper that will go to the council for their consideration and policy discussions on some main policy questions. We do not permit billboards, period, in town right now. And so that's the first question that we'll have to get over if they choose to do this. I don't know if we said this or not, but as you'll recall, I think, the city of Glendale is reaping huge benefits from the billboards that they have installed along 101. And, I mean, that's upwards of $3 million that they're getting. And obviously we won't be able to command those prices. But first of all, we have to look at, can we allow billboards on city property while we don't allow them on private property? And that's a major policy question. So the council will be grappling with that over the next couple months. Let's take a look at our projected deficit. This is where I want to start discussing operating surpluses, operating expenditures, operating revenues. To us, that is what a structural deficit is. If it's insufficient operating revenues to pay for operating expenses, which we have been in a couple cases this past couple years, that's a no-no, in my opinion. In this case, we have today right-sized our government. By cutting this $15.7 million, we have right-sized our government. At the present time, we are collecting revenues of $52 million. This is in fiscal year 10 and 11, $52,139,000. The transfers in is $3.1 million. This represents the charges for services that our general fund makes for the utility funds. So that's a current ongoing revenue. So the total sources are $55.239 million.
Howard Broadbeck, on your slide 4, you're showing an estimate, a 2010 estimate of 59.4, which agrees with what Larry gave us 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, 59.4. But on this slide, how do you go from 59.4 to 55.2? What happened there?
Larry, can you come up and answer that, please? Construction sales tax, thank you.
And is that
Construction sales tax.
okay? And are there costs associated with construction sales tax also, or no?
Costs from
Is there a cost piece associated with construction sales tax?
not necessarily. That goes into the capital budget for capital purposes, basically.
Okay, so So Larry included construction sales tax in the 59.4. Is that what we're saying?
That's what we're saying.
And that's not available somehow to the general fund?
Well, it is available. It's general fund revenue, Howard, but the city council has always had a policy that construction sales taxes, because it's so volatile, should not be used for ongoing purposes. So therefore, we keep it over in the capital improvements fund.
Okay, so besides the $55 million, there's another $4 million that the city has available to it to spend. But the council, you're saying the council doesn't like to see that?
On the construction sales taxes?
Yeah.
They look at that as the capital improvements program, which they're going to be receiving on May 10th along with the budget. And let me tell you
This
just
may be
briefly, right
total
now, the
revenues, and this
construction
may be
sales
operating
taxes
revenues.
are wildly volatile. We have gone from a high of $2 million a month in 2007, I think it was. We budgeted this year, because it's been dropping so precipitously, we budgeted at $500,000 a month, so $6 million. And we last month collected $235,000. So that construction sales tax has fallen. The good news is we can't go below zero. I mean, so
Right.
that's about it.
But in essence, there is an additional $4 million of revenues available to the city above what you've shown on slide number 7.
Yes, that's
Okay.
fair statement.
No,
Yeah, it's one-time monies, but
why are they one-time? Every year we don't have construction sales tax?
every year we have them, but they're only one time because the developers only pay it one time.
Right.
So
And each year it's different developers, it's different construction sales tax, and, we don't, so you're saying you can't predict the revenues from construction sales tax with as much certainty as you've predicted $55.2 million.
that's a fair statement. Yes.
Okay. But that doesn't mean that revenue's not there.
No, it does not.
Okay. And it's really not one-time revenue. It's one-time revenue in the year it occurs, but it happens to occur every year. It's occurred every year that we've been a city, probably.
From different
No, that's not right.
It hasn't occurred every year.
No, not in, one year it's 25 million and next year it's 5, so you
I'm
want
not
to
saying-
budget
I'm
20
not
million?
I'm not saying it doesn't
Why are we doing
fluctuate.
sidewalk?
I'm not saying it doesn't fluctuate. I just want to
Where's the
understand what was the difference
The
between...
reason they're in such a big
I don't
problem
understand
is
any of
because they
this.
use part of that construction sales tax for operations, so you
That's
don't
fine.
want to...
I understand.
Well,
I
don't
understand.
drag us there, okay? Keep the construction sales tax separate from, this is operating. This here is total revenues. There's a big difference. He's talking about an operating budget now. This is a total revenue budget.
Okay.
Can we keep this organized, because I get confused? Who's the
you guys want?
who's the facilitator here?
I'm not.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm overwhelmed by the numbers, and we're going to do sidebar here. I can't follow.
okay. Could you give me a little hint on what part of it? Is it the definition of the different funds, or is
No,
it
everything from when everything got crossing each other.
Okay, so are we getting an echo? It's almost
Yeah.
hard to hear one another in here.
They're all turned on. That's
Okay.
I can't even turn it off, so.
Let's back up. It seems like we've got a couple things, and I think you're both saying the same thing. I think Howard understands exactly what you're saying. I think you're just saying it happens every year to some level, right?
And then he said no.
And it does happen every year to some level, and I think Larry's making the point that it's not predictable. The level's not predictable, so you don't count on it as an ongoing revenue, but it's still money, it's still there.
It
What I was
may,
trying to talk about is, this slide is an operating revenue, operating expenditure.
Right.
Howard's, what he's talking about here is a total revenue picture.
Yes.
That's not a total revenue picture.
I understand that, and I think Howard, correct me if I'm wrong, Howard understands that, and simply saying, but there is money there, whether it's on operating or put in capital. Am I being fair to
But
the
that's like
interpretation?
saying, like saying there's 365 million there.
I understand, Larry.
well, these are all still estimates.
They're all-
These are estimates. So, I mean, there must be some estimate of what the construction sales tax is going to be.
I think the
for some
important
year.
thing to understand in this particular conversation is there are two distinct uses. One is where unpredictable money tends to go to allow for capital improvement, and the other is the stuff we can count on if we create an operating budget, we can count on it year after year. And then, of course, the argument comes in, is there a baseline, bottom line of unpredictable that still happens?
And you know,
Even if it's predictable, they have a policy that says you shouldn't use it for operations.
Absolutely. I understand.
So it's not
what have
available.
we been doing with it for all these years? We've been putting it aside?
No, they've been
Then it's
using it
the
for
capital
operations.
Oh, we've been using it for operations all these years.
No, we've been using it for capital expenditures.
We've been using it for something.
We've been using it for capital construction.
Here's my point, my reason for asking these questions. 2 weeks ago, we all left here and said, well, in 2 weeks, someone's going to come here and explain what the difference is in all these numbers. So now we get to the 7th slide, and the numbers are different. So that's what I was trying to get at. What was the difference between the numbers Larry gave us and the numbers that you just gave us? And there's a $4 million difference. And what I heard you say is the difference is there are some revenues that you don't include in the total operating revenues or total revenues that Larry proposed, but in slide number 4 you gave us, you did show that in total revenues, the city expects to collect $59.4 million. And I wanted to understand what the difference was between that number and the number on slide number 7. I understand it now, and I don't know if the rest of the group is interested in more understanding or not, but that's what I wanted to understand.
But you are correct, Howard, and you are correct, Larry, but the policy is that we don't spend that money on operating purposes, and that's why we don't include it
Right.
in the operating budget. The council has already made that policy statement.
Okay?
Thank you, though.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, thank you.
Then ongoing operating expenditures, we have $52.074 million, and that's the operating balance. And that is a surplus of $3.165 million. Yes, sir.
Howard Broadbeck, sorry. It's going to be the same question. Now, on expenditures, the information that Larry gave us through December of '09 was that, and I know you have a slide that gets back to that, but we were at a run rate for the current year of about $44 million, which is less than 52. And so maybe you're going to get to that and explain how we went from...
Slide 10.
I hear you. After we go from, how we go from 44 to 52, you're going to
I
talk...
hope to, yes.
Okay.
And then the transfers out. So in effect, the balance, the budget, the operating budget is balanced. Our current revenues are $55.2 million, and our current expenditures are $3.1 million. And so we have presented a budget, an operating budget, to the council in the past. We still are working on this year's, that is, in my opinion, a balanced budget. Now, we are in a real world, and we have to pay back money we borrow. And so we also put in to the general fund expenditures of $8.966 million, and that's where you get the structural deficit of $5.8 million, because the difference in that, and that's the ballpark operations, and the HERF, thank you, the Highway Users Fund, Revenue Fund. So I just want to show this picture that the operating budget is in balance, but we still have obligations to the community to pay for the $8.96 million. And then the 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014, each of those years in the estimates are in a balanced position for the operating budget of, in 2011 it will be $3.5 million, in 2012 $5.2 million, in 2013 $7.3 million, in 2014 $9.8 million. And that will be the first year that the operating budget balance will be sufficient to cover the expenses that we're paying for from the general fund, and have enough to cover that.
John?
Yes.
Barry Hemp. And you'll really have to excuse me. You guys are really good at this finance stuff. I'm just going to ask probably a really dumb question here. But you used terminology that you presented a balanced budget except for this $9 million in transfers out. If I were going to put together a budget and presented it and told my boss that we're balanced, oh, but by the way, there's this other $9 million here we got to pay for, why aren't they all put together and balanced it that way as opposed to balance it and then say, yes, but?
And the only point I'm trying to make this with this chart is that these are the actual numbers as they fall. we have a lot more millions of dollars in the other operating funds and the water fund, the sewer fund, and everything else. So when we put the whole budget together, it will be balanced. I mean, but the balance may be, I mean, for example, it's not proposed right now, but this is a balanced budget. We have a structural deficit of $5.8 million. As you all know, we had $4 million additional identified in the audit this past year. This is balanced because, we have $29.1 million right now in reserves, 24 million of which are available somewhere around there. I mean, so if you wanted to, you could recommend this budget to the council, and they would take $5.8 million out of reserves and operate the city on a balanced basis. So what I'm trying to get at is there's still a lot of work we need to do on the budget, but we're getting very close, and I'll get closer as I show you these slides to these figures. So what figure we're working with this evening, from my perspective to you, is a $1.6 million deficit that we're still trying to cover.
I'm sorry, Mike Kiak, for 2011, 2012?
Pardon me, I'm sorry.
You said there's a $1.6 million deficit. Are we talking about for next year's budget?
Yes.
Okay. So we started as a committee at $3 million. Today we're at $1.6 million.
Basically, yes.
Okay, thank you.
John, Bill Stipp, the terminology that you've used about balanced operating budget, you're more or less pulling out operating revenue, operating expenditures.
Yes, that's all what you wanted last 2 weeks ago,
right,
when we presented Exhibit 3, which was just operating expenditures stripped of capital and other things.
Yeah, so you're not talking about any other monies.
Sure.
So, and I think that maybe where some of the confusion lies.
That's where the confusion comes in.
Yeah, okay.
But again, we're just trying to present the information to you that you've wanted. And so I just wanted to point out that it is in balance from an operating standpoint.
Thank you.
John?
Yes.
Marvin Fair. Just one question. We're in 910 currently, correct?
Yes.
So do we know the projected net ending balance for this current year?
I don't think I hit that right now, but we're projecting that we will save $2 million this year from what's budgeted.
That further brings us in line with the balanced budget for next year. Okay.
Okay, so the deficit.
So let me just make one, and it's just to reduce confusion. And I think you said something that maybe you didn't mean exactly. You said on an operating basis you're in balance for this year, but actually 3.165 is a surplus, right? I mean, your budget it's more than balanced. It's more than balanced by $3.165 million. So on an operating basis, there's a $3 million surplus.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Given these numbers here.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the thing that Larry and I were talking about is another $4-point-something million that's actually in addition to that $3.1 million surplus.
Yes, it is. And
okay.
Larry, what is our estimate? Are we lowering it? This year we have $500,000 a month expected in construction sales taxes. So we're going down to $300?
$3 million.
$3 million, yeah. So next year's budget will incorporate $3 million in construction sales taxes because of the $235,000 rate we're at right now.
And when you say next year's, you mean the 2010, 2011?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
July 1st to June
10, 11.
30th.
Okay.
Thank you. So the deficit for fiscal year 10 and 11, as I mentioned, was $5.8 million at the bottom line. And we are looking at making that up, recommending that we make that up to the council with one-time revenues, remaining PIC proceeds. We've talked about previously that we have $2.2 million available from the PIC bond sales, the savings that we encountered in building the Cincinnati Reds facilities, and the PIC bond, that we sold the PIC bond, so we have the money in the bank, and the only thing that you can use those bond proceeds for is to repay the bonds that you've borrowed. So those $2.2 million we can use for the PIC bonds that currently we're repaying out of the general fund, and so we can replace that cost with this $2.2 million.
And these are funds that have already occurred, is what you're saying, is that right?
We already have them in the bank.
Okay, and so that's taking the $5.8 million that's in yellow at the bottom of page 7,
Yes.
and it's reducing it by that amount to say it's $1.6 million now.
And the $2 million that I will talk about in a moment, to the 1.6. So the 2.2 is the PIC bonds.
Right.
And then the $2 million is the estimated fund balance that we are going to have at the end of this year that we are recommending be rolled over, or we're looking at recommending that it be rolled over to use $4.2 million, and that would bring the deficit down to the $1.6 million. And I've previously talked about $3 million.
Right.
Yes.
On your previous slide, why would the transfer in be counted in order to balance the operating budget and the transfer out's not?
Because the transfers in are operating revenues from the standpoint that the utility funds, we're giving them a service and they have to pay us in the general fund for those services that are provided.
Yeah, but those stadium excise tax debt service has to be paid.
And that's why we're showing it, but I just want to make the point that from an operating standpoint, you could exclude them.
You could what?
Exclude them. I mean, you can't do it in reality. I recognize that we always have to pay our debts, but that's just a figure that is misused when we talk about the budget and the balancing of the budget.
I guess I don't see how you have a choice but not to pay debt service with your general fund sources.
It's already committed.
I agree, but I just wanted to show you the operating.
So you don't necessarily have to pay it with your operating sources. You could
That's
pay it
correct.
with your fund balance or your contingency fund.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and just, again, just so everybody asks, you know, that we're on the same page. Does everybody understand that what the transfers out are, the $8.9 million? That hasn't significantly changed from what Larry showed us 2 weeks ago. And what that is primarily, and it's outside of operating because it's not, I mean, even in a business you wouldn't consider it operating, you include it in total expenses. But it's an interest expense on, it's 5.3 million on the ballpark and an operating loss on the ballpark of 2.4. Those are the numbers Larry gave us as a, you know, like this, not exact. But what they've come back with is very close, I think, to what Larry had showed us 2 weeks ago. So everybody understands what that is? It's that the ballpark's losing money, but it's in a separate area, so it's considered separately. And it's that the interest expense on the ballpark bonds are having to be paid by the general fund. I don't know if that's because the ballpark isn't making as much as expected or not, but for whatever reason, it's not included in the operating numbers.
That is correct, Howard.
Okay.
So the deficit we're proposing, we could propose to use $4.2 million and then the $1.6 million deficit. And this is just the timeline again to show you, when we started preparing this year's budget back on February 10th of 08, and the time frame that we moved up, we cover an 18-month period in effect that we're covering with our budget estimates. So that's why the difficulty in municipal budgeting is there, and that's why we also got caught, so to speak, in the plummeting sales tax revenues. Our sales taxes have held up very well, but our construction sales taxes, as I just referenced, have fallen off the face of the earth. But the city of Goodyear has very aggressively been managing this budget for over 2 years now and have made the significant cuts. That's why the city of Goodyear is in a lot better shape than a lot of the cities around us, quite frankly. Okay, this is the run rate that Howard has talked about, the $22.3 million. Times 2 is $44.6 million. The problem with that, then we sat down with every department and went through their budget. Okay, what's going to be spent in the second half of the year that has not been spent yet in the first half of the year, so it's not a linear equation. And here's some examples. We have an entire list that Larry is prepared to go over with you if you want, but these are some examples. IT software maintenance, we have an extra $191,000 to spend that has not been spent in the first half of the year, so it will not be an equal match. $80,000 in legal services because we have a significant lawsuit that has just started billing right now. Victim advocacy billing, that hasn't been paid for the first half of the year, and that's for the building next to the City Hall, and that's for the police department and the Victim Advocacy Center, $247,000. YMCA pool contract will be in the neighborhood of $235,000, none of which has been spent yet. The public safety overtime, we calculated that all out, and that will be an extra $94,000 that hasn't been spent for the first half of the year. I suspect most of that's probably because of the ballpark. I'm not sure, but that's probably what that's for. The emergency service agreements, excuse me, and the Sonoran Valley Sheriff's contract, those two together are the contracts that we were able to negotiate with the Sheriff's Office. That was, I forget the numbers exactly, I'm sorry, but it was roughly $152,000, where we were furnishing, we had to furnish police protection once the city decided to annex the Montage area way down south in Mobile. And so we contracted with the sheriff to provide one officer 7 days a week. And so that one officer 7 days a week is costing us about $157,000 because we're obligated to provide police protection to those people, and we did not have the resources, nor do we have the communications to cover that area because we lack a communications tower to serve that area. The emergency service agreements include the fire department contract. When we annexed that area, we were required by contract, by development agreement with the developer to furnish full-time fire protection there. So we had to build a station, the developer paid for it, but at that time he also had to pay for manning the station to a full structure. So we hired 14 additional firefighters, and that's at roughly $1.2 million a year, and he had never paid us for that portion. So right now we are stuck with a multi-million-dollar non-performance contract or development agreement with that developer. So what we have done is negotiate with the town of Maricopa, which abuts us down there right now, and the town of Maricopa has taken over the fire protection for that area, and we're paying them about $75,000 a year for that, and this year about $50,000 extra to help them relocate the station because they are going to relocate it in further towards Maricopa, but it'll be, I think, about 2-3 miles from where the present fire station is located in, I call it downtown Mobile, but right next to the Mobile School. So that way we're getting the fire protection down there 24/7, and that's for a lot less money than it's costing us. Now, what we've done with those 14 people is brought them up here to Maine Goodyear, and we are using them. Paul Louisi, the interim fire chief, is using them as fillers, so to speak, rovers. So if this station has a man sick, and therefore they only have a 3-man shift, and we are under contract to furnish 4-man trucks with the Phoenix Mutual Aid response system, so we have to call somebody in on overtime or put another body in there. So we're using these bodies, and Paul this past year I think has been able to save $603,000 in overtime. So we've almost cut that number in half, and the rest we've also frozen in 1 or 2 positions in the fire department because of captains resigning. So we're getting that down a lot closer, but we're still spending probably $500,000 extra dollars in the fire department in order to maintain those 14 people. Does that make sense? I mean,
Mike Kiak, I've got one question for you. So if I'm understanding correctly, the numbers you're showing to us, or the examples you're showing to us, in total, we're not seeing about $2.9 million in nonlinear expenditures.
Yeah, and as I said, that list is a lot longer. What the departments estimate, the first half, 22 times 3, would be times 2 plus whatever that 3-point-some million.
Okay, my question is this. If there are nonlinear expenses yet to be expended through the second half of the fiscal budget, were there nonlinear expenses that you paid in the first half of the budget that such the times 2 is not necessarily a valid number?
I can't honestly answer that. Larry, can you? Or
am I asking that question?
Wait.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items, they about 1.3.
Yeah.
Right. You're not saying you're multiplying those times 2, are you?
No.
It's only 1.3.
No, I'm saying during the first half of the year, were there nonlinears in that? Because if you take out the nonlinears, you understand where I'm going with that?
Well, there's $3 million difference between 44 and 47, right? But there's only $1.3 million of nonlinears shown. So there's actually $2 million somewhere that is going to be spent in the second half. He didn't multiply it by 2.
And
there's an additional $2 million besides these.
As I said, these are just examples. Larry, can you, in a few minutes?
Let's see. You're saying the net same amount of numbers that happened.
I will try to do this
You're right.
in just a couple of minutes, because this, as John has indicated, is some examples of some expenditures that come in the second half of the year.
Understood.
I've got a calculation that I've run that scares people because it kind of addresses your question a little more directly, and it gets a lot more confusing to get to the same idea. And I'm going to show it on Elmo real quick.
Let me be perfectly clear. The problem I'm having is that if I know there are nonlinears that occurred in the first half of the year, taking the run rate through the first half and then multiplying by 2 isn't necessarily I'm not tracking with you relative to that logic. I mean, I understand the additional $3 million as nonlinear expected in the second half of the year, but I'm trying to understand, is there nonlinear in the first half that says you can't just simply multiply by 2?
Yeah, because you showed us your 08 numbers in the same thing you gave us and they were almost flat over the entire year. I mean, in fact, you gave us 18 months worth of data, and it looks extremely flat. So, I mean, there's 18 months of history that support exactly what Mike's saying.
Again, I don't know if I'm asking the question right, so I mean...
You are.
Okay.
You are.
All right.
Yes, I think it's very... I understand the question completely, and I'm going to start this chart. I apologize, I don't even have copies. I can get you copies tomorrow. But the chart that I have up there isolates many of the same expenditures that we had before, but I want to point out a couple of them that John didn't mention because it kind of addresses what you're talking about, and it really is where the numbers get large. This one right here, fire personnel. What that number shows is, thank you, Jeff. The fire personnel, which is the second line of the bottom, that is not a part of the chart that John had up there a few minutes ago. The 14 firefighters that John talked about, those were paid for out of the general fund on the charts that I gave you, the Schedule 3s that I gave you. The first 6 months of 08-09, they were paid for out of the general fund. The second 6 months, the charges for the first 6 months got backed out, and they weren't included in there the second 6 months. This year, they're all part of the budget. So the first 6 months, we had spent actual for the entire line item, emergency services, for the salaries and wages, $2.5 million. This $2,484,360. At the end of the year, because we had backed out those costs at that point in time, we had spent $3.4 million in that line item. The costs got moved to a fund that we had segregated for all of the costs down there in the Sonoran Valley. Beginning this fiscal year, we didn't separate those costs any further because we knew we weren't getting reimbursed from the developer. So for the first half of this fiscal year, we spent $2.8 million. We're going to spend roughly $2.8 million the second half of this fiscal year on those salaries. But the calculated amount, which is spending at the same pattern we did a year ago, the calculated amount says we would only spend $3.8 million for the entire year. That creates a shortage at the end of the year of approximately $1.8 million. There are other Sonoran Valley costs, including the line below, that was a retirement account that the benefits got charged to or credited out, and that does that calculation. The others, what we did is we took the top 25 budget variances that we had this year and did an analysis of those. And this is only showing some of them up there. The total of the ones that are included, the ones not included in that analysis is this personnel item that I just talked about and the fire overtime, and I'll go through both of those. But the others were all included in that analysis. And this schedule, they total about $1.3 million. That analysis for all 25 accounts actually totaled $1.8 million. But all I was trying to do is to show here that in the calculation, in one case, we're estimating this year's actual based on discussion with the Department of actual amount. So I'm not trying to reconcile to the penny. I'm not trying to say that any line item itself is the cause, but I'm trying to show some significant line items that work both ways. Out of the 25 in there, we had some of them that actually went upside down, if you will. They went the other way, and that's, Mike, I think the question that you're asking. They actually, one of them decreased by $200,000. That's still part of it, but the total of these that I've shown you is actually less than the total of all 25. Police and fire overtime. A year ago, the first half of the year, the overtime budgets for both of those, in police, they had spent almost $400,000, and in fire, they had spent $760,000. About December of last year, we changed our practices for overtime for all departments in the city, but the two biggest impacted departments were police and fire. They significantly reduced the overtime that they were earning. So what happened was, you'll notice that the police overtime reduced by $150,000, or increased by $150,000 for the second half of the year. This year, you can see further that we're spending even less. We're only spending $108,000 for the first 6 months. Well, under the calculation, that would come out at $150,000. The department estimate is about $310,000 for the year because you've got the ballpark in the second half of the year. So we added the number of these up, and they total about $3.3 million. I show that total then just for illustrative purposes. Like I say, there's about 18 others that were on a schedule of the top 25 line items, but I only showed a group of them here just to make it a little bit manageable.
So you're saying through June 2010 is what's calculated in the stuff you gave us 2 weeks ago?
Now, it's calculated simply on the ratio of the 6 months and the 12. Okay. That calculation is simply that mathematical ratio.
And then you went to the departments and said,
what's
your estimate?
That's correct.
And one department came back $2 million higher than what you had calculated.
Which would be the fire personnel.
Right. And what's the reason for that large of a difference?
Because this year, all of the firefighters are being charged to that line item. Last year, they were charged to that line item in the first half of the year. It was subtracted out in the second half of the year, and in addition, they weren't charged there in the second half of the year. Yes, because of the reimbursement expected from the developer.
Larry, just so in simple terms, the run rate that showed 22 million and times 2 gets 44 million basically excludes the budgeted Sonoran Valley. Is that a fair analogy that we looked at? And currently what we're seeing now is you've taken Sonoran Valley because it's not going to get paid until a new developer shows up and you put it back into the operating budget.
Yes. Last year...
Wait, is that a yes, I'm correct, or a yes?
Pretty close. I just want to state it my way, Gary, to see if this is what you just said, if you agree here. Last year, we were billing the developer for, I'm going to use the fire as the example, that was the largest amount, for the fire personnel that were down there. We still charged them into the fire department budget, but we credited that budget by the amount we billed, so it didn't get charged to two places. We had a separate fund set up where we were charging all of the services for the Sonoran Valley, and it was to be reimbursed by the developer, so that fund would have been self-balancing had we received all the payments.
And when did you stop that fund?
We stopped doing, or we didn't make the chargebacks for the first 6 months until January of 2009. So you had 6-month charges in December that came through as a negative in January of 2009. And then another charge happened in June of 2009, a credit, if you will, to reduce it for the second half expenses. So we ran the math through on that charge. This year, July 1st of this year, all of it was in the general fund. Okay? And so this year it ran pure, but it created a distorted ratio on that formula, and that's why it's on this schedule.
You're saying July 1st of 09, it was all in?
July 1st of 09 going forward, all of them were in there, staying there, no adjustment. But
and that's where but that's where the 22 million comes from.
But the ratio, last year we had spent, as you can see, of the final number that we actually spent, $3.4 million, we had spent $2.4 million of that through December because it included those salaries.
I'm going to have to think. Can we get a copy of that?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure.
I'll be happy to get you a copy of it.
Because if it's in the July, if you're saying as of July 09, the total cost or the total charges for that fire service were in the 09 to 10 numbers, then it would seem to me, for some reason they've gone up dramatically if we're adding to that, because that would have been in the $22 million run rate. But let's just, I mean, I don't know, I can't understand what you're saying. I'll have to think about it, I guess.
Well, I think there's two things just to make sure before we leave this. There's a copy of that report and an explanation, a simple explanation of where that money was and why it is not reflected in the 9-10 budget in the fashion that would make it balance out throughout the year. Does that make sense? Because if I hear what you're saying, make sure I understand that if it was in the budget, it would have been proportionally distributed over the year and it wouldn't show as a larger ad in the second half.
Yeah. And that doesn't answer Mike's question, which was there's got to be lumpy stuff in the first half of the year, too.
Right.
And rather than just saying, okay, well, there was zero lumpy stuff in the first half, now there's a bunch of lumpy stuff and we're going to add it all in the second half. You know?
No, as an example, health insurance, we only have 5 months in this year, but we had 5 months in last year. We also have some salaries, engineering department salaries, that when the formula applies through, the same formula that I just showed you, that actually shows a minus of $200,000. And that's all part of that total that I gave you earlier, that totals about 1.8 million, I think.
Okay, so here's one more question. Let's say we accept exactly these numbers and we say, okay, we don't understand them, but 47.5 is the right number, right? Okay, that's on slide 10. Going back to slide number 7, we still don't know what the difference is between 52 and 47.5.
Okay. The operating expenditures on that slide also include the sales tax reimbursement, and that's the 10-11 slide. Keep in mind that you're looking at 10-11 numbers and not 9-10 numbers. Those two are two that come out real quick at me. In other words, you're looking at 2 different years' worth of data. This is 9-10 information.
I see.
Going
Okay.
over with you.
And you're saying that the run rate is going to go up from 47.5 to 52 in a year.
There's about $2 million of sales tax reimbursements that aren't even in that $47 million number.
And sales tax reimbursements are costs.
They are costs,
Okay.
but they aren't part of the Schedule 3 that we gave you.
Okay. And what besides, so now we're up to 49, we're still $2 million. I mean, since we're only at 1.6 million now, $2 million is a significant number, especially since we said the construction sales tax revenue is still not included in slide number 7. So there's another, Larry, you pick whatever number it might be. It's not, probably not 0, though.
It's like
I'll look at that while John moves on.
Okay.
all the money around.
But before we move on, I do have a question. And this may go to what Mike was asking. My experience is that the lumpy numbers that Howard was talking about that occur in the second half is pretty typical, that when a budget item is approved, it takes the first 6 or 7 months to get it negotiated to where it comes due. And then they all pile in the second half.
I hear
of
what
the
you're
year.
saying, but he also gave us 18 months of previous history that did not show that kind of lumpiness. It was very flat.
It is conceivable, but yeah, the
yeah.
numbers aren't speaking for themselves.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm sorry, guys, I'm just trying to understand.
We will take a look at it and try to get back to you with something.
Okay, but in my mind, going back to slide 7, in my mind, there's about $2 million plus of expenditures from 47.5 to 52 that are still out there. And there's the additional revenue from the construction sales tax that I know you said the council doesn't want to consider, but, you know, so you add that to let's say, pick a number, 3 plus 2, it's $5 million or so before you started to apply the $4.2 million in slide number 8. So if you add those together, that's almost $9 million you're applying to a $5.8 million structural deficit, which in my mind says we're $3 million to the good, which if you don't want to consider construction sales tax, it says we're just about balanced. But go ahead, keep going.
But Howard,
And that's not including any of the money that he projected from PIC funds and things like that.
No, that is including the PIC money. Yeah.
Okay.
but you're in balance because your rainy day fund, everything, at the end of the year, all the money that they save gets put into the quote-unquote rainy day fund. And the rainy day fund started 2 years ago at $20 million. It was budgeted to be cut by $3.1 million, so, or whatever, 3.7. It was supposed to go down to 16.3, yet in reality, as the city manager is saying, we're sitting on a cash position right now of $29 million. So from a budget point of view, the budget says we have 16.3, the bank says we have 29 million, and how do you move, basically what the city manager is saying is we can tap these excess funds to balance our budget. It doesn't mean we're going to spend the money in the future year.
Well, I don't think any of that.
Is that what the city manager's saying? Is that what you're saying?
We haven't talked about the rainy day fund at all. In fact,
I'm sorry, wait a minute. Yeah. I just want to make sure that what Gary said, because he referenced you.
I think what Gary said was correct, but the 29.1 million, or whatever it is, that the bank says we have, needs to be reduced by 4 or 5 million because those are carryovers that are still committed. And so I think our balance right now is the 24.1 million.
So what are we doing here?
but you haven't shown any of those funds on any of these slides so far, have you?
Coming up.
Right, but it's not on anything we've talked about so far. So going back to what I'm saying is, it looks to me that without considering construction sales tax, that we're considering it 0, unless there's something else on here that you haven't showed us, it looks as though we're about in balance for 2010-11.
Right.
The trouble is that you're using one-time monies, mixing up one-time monies with ongoing monies.
Well, which is the one-time money I'm using?
The $4.1 million, for example, that we saved and put into the rainy day fund.
Is that what's on slide, we were talking about on slide 8?
One time money.
Oh, it's going to, I think it's slide 11.
Slide what?
Slide 8, there's $4.2 million that you applied to the 5.8 there.
Yes.
Rainy day fund money is in slide 8?
No, but
No.
that 2.2 and the 2 million are one-time monies. And Joe Cozzillo last Monday
Okay.
night.
All right, I understand that. But you're suggesting we do apply those to 2010 and 11, right? In that slide.
I'm suggesting that we're taking a look at that, yes.
Okay.
But to apply those, John, correct me if I'm wrong, for one term or one-time needs. So the application of one-time money to one-time needs is a reasonable amount.
Gives us another year to
Right. And you understand, folks, why the end-of-year balance is one-time money? Is because it's left over and it's not part of the cash flow predictable in the following year, so it has to be treated appropriately.
Well, but Dick, going back to this whole discussion we've had tonight, he's applying $4.2 million to a $5.8 million, what he's calling an operating budget deficit. Okay, so an operating budget deficit is not a one-time expenditure.
Right.
So,
Except for the fact that the debt service in that particular year isn't creating a capital responsibility that carries an additional general fund responsibility. Is that right?
Well, is that what John's saying?
I don't know.
Well, I'm not trying to complicate it. I really want to try to
Confused
make
right
it
now. I'm
simpler.
sorry.
But the application of one-time money to one-time needs is what they have to do. Is that right, Larry? Generally?
I've only caught part of it, so
I just want to make sure people understand the difference between one-time money and ongoing predictable revenues.
okay, then I'll just simplify it. We're at 47.5 on slide 10. Larry said there's $2 million something, which I don't remember what he called. Sales tax. Okay? That's 49.5. But the operating expenditure shown on slide 7 is 52. So that's still $2 million difference. And I understand that slide 8 is just a proposal, but that $2 million more than covers the $1.6 million minus that's shown on slide 8. And I'm not saying any of this is the right thing or the wrong thing to do. I'm just, so I'm clear and the committee's clear, that looks to me like where we are right now.
Well, I apologize, but I'm more confused than ever. So the committee, I hope, is clear.
Good.
If I may go on.
I got a different question.
Sure, Larry.
On the deficit, where it shows how this $5.8 million and the remaining PIC proceeds to pay debt service one-time funds at 2.2. Was that? I'm trying to understand what the city had borrowed some money and actually the project came in less, so there's some bond proceeds left over. And so you're going to use that to reduce the outstanding debt or use it to pay some year's debt service?
Use it to pay some year's debt service. Okay.
One last thing. I just noticed this, and maybe Larry will have to answer this, but the transfers out in the stadium and HERF, I don't remember this for sure, but I thought in 2009 it was about $8 or $9 million. It was mostly the stadium. And since the Reds have now come to the stadium, shouldn't those numbers be getting smaller and smaller as each year goes on? And it's the same number here throughout.
Not necessarily. They go up because our costs go up. And I think Brian and Mike will address that when they make their presentation.
Wow.
Actually, I'm almost done. The question about how did the $4 million fund balance occur in fiscal year 08 and now 09, it was quite simple. It was conservative forecasting. As this year we're coming in $2 million to the good. Favorable construction costs on projects such as the Reds, came in very favorable, plus the bidding climate was very favorable right now because of the economy. And CFD funds that were already collected and held for years for Palm Valley were able to be released to subsidize street improvement. And all of that added up to the $4 million savings in the expenditures. And in summary, fiscal year 10 revenues are tracking with the budget of $60 million. Fiscal year 11 operating balance of $3.1 million. We have a structural deficit of $5.8 million. Proposed strategy to use one-time funds of $4.2 million. And the deficit that we need to address, you can address as much of it as you want, or $5.8 million. But the deficit we're working on right now at the staff level is $1.6 million. I'm afraid to ask if there's any questions.
I guess my question would be for Evelyn at this point, because I know you had a lot of questions about, well, is it really this or is it really this? After all this discussion, are you any closer to where you really think it is? Because I think you might be a barometer for how the rest of the committee is. To me, nothing's changed in what Larry proposed, except that some of the numbers came in with a bunch of lumpy stuff for the second half of the year, part of which we don't know exactly what it is. And then there's this question of how we went from 47.5 plus 2 to 52. So, there's a couple $1 million there. But beyond that, the question was, is it really $13 million, or is it really we have a zero or a surplus? And what's your impression?
If I just may interrupt 1 second.
Yeah.
You're mixing years, and that's what's so confusing to me.
I hear you. Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're doing. I'm sorry, Evelyn.
I guess I have the benefit of having worked in public accounting, public funding for most of my career, so I understand how these projections come about, and I understand that there can be gray areas and a great deal of variance in the first half of the year to the second half of the year. I merely wanted a ballpark that was a little bit closer because there's a great deal of problem solving to be done if you're looking at a very large number like 13 million or something compared to 1.6. It would be an altogether different task for us. As far as mincing this down to the infinite number, I kind of compare that to picking fly feces out of pepper. It just after a while becomes futile. So at this point, I would say we're close enough because you can make your list prioritized. Start at the top with the cuts that you feel are the most important or the revenue generators that you feel are the most important that the city can get a handle on, and then take your list down to those that are of lesser value. And let them go with a prioritized list that we can agree on, and whether the number's 1.6 or whether the number's 5.8, it will cover the task that we've been assigned to do, and we can stop moving around the pepper grains.
So are we done?
But you're saying it's not 13 million or whatever we started with.
No, I'm using that as a fictitious number to say that there's a wide range that things could be, but I feel comfortable in what John has presented to us to give us a ballpark of what we're aiming at here, and it will always be a ballpark. It won't ever be the specific number because there is variance in how money is spent in the year and the one-time sources. All of that makes a difference. So I am comfortable with that, yeah.
Okay.
I have a question now. Are we in a $13 million crisis?
No.
No, we aren't.
Okay, well, that's what we were told when we got here.
You weren't.
We've come a long way in 100,000 questions to show that we're not.
I just wanted to make sure.
No, you aren't, and that's not what I said, and you aren't in a $13.9 million crisis. Brian and Mike, or Brian? Thank you.
So, this is Mike Yank. I have a question. I mean, realistically, as much as I love the ballpark and I'd love to hear about the ballpark, I mean, it was a great game the other day, by the way. Do we need any more presentation at this point? I mean, realistically.
I think it's important to understand the ballpark because as we came in, I heard people have rather pointed questions about the ballpark. And so I think that that ballpark has a rich future for us, and I'd like to be able to anticipate what that rich future is.
Okay, fair enough. Good for me.
Good evening. My name is Brian Dalkey. I'm Deputy City Manager with Goodyear. Been with the city, it will be 16 years this month, so quite some time. 5 of those years as a Deputy Manager. Previous years were as the Economic Development Director. So prior to that, I had a career in utilities, did a fair amount of budgeting with Salt River Project and a variety of other, I would say, functions with Salt River Project over those years. Tonight I actually have about 20 slides. I'm going to go through several of them quite quickly. The focus is really look at the numbers, but I think it's important to look at some of the history briefly that went into this so you could understand some of the policy decisions that were made by our City Council. First, project history, how we became a Cactus League host city. We'll be going through that. I'll be going through some of the project agreements, that's use agreements that we have with the 2 teams, the Indians and the Reds, as well as the Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority. We'll get into the financing structures of the deal, and then finally the operations. We'll be bringing up Mike Svets. He said that he's Rivera? Yeah, he's a closer in Mike's terms, so he'll be coming up and talking about the operations because it's very important as far as how we try and reduce that subsidy that we currently have. So first and foremost, don't want to go into a lot of history, but Goodyear's been at this for a long time. In the 1990s, we were actually approached by the Astros. Drayton McLean, owner of the Astros, actually has McLean SunWest, which is a business here on McDowell Road, and he was interested in us building a spring training facility for him. We couldn't afford it. And then a couple of years later, 1999, 2000, Los Angeles Dodgers were looking at leaving Vero Beach. So they approached us. They also approached Indian Reservation. Same thing. We were not at a point in the youth of our community to try and afford baseball. So we passed on those. 2003, 2004, Artie Moreno, he's the owner of the Angels, and he had at the time about 20,000 acres of property in Goodyear, Strand Mountain Ranch, and then a fair amount of industrial property in and around the airport area. So he was interested in moving out of Tempe to Goodyear and actually put it on his property that oddly enough was in between where the ballpark is now and the airport. As we went through that, he was going to fund a portion of it, and the city was going to fund $10 million is all at that point. So as a result of that, we went out to our public and through a general obligation bond was passed 2-1 on funding spring training. So that question was actually asked on the ballot. We went through that, and Mr. Moreno decided to stay in Tempe, and that's where they play today. But I think what it did is it really whet the appetite and the drive for the community to go forward in pursuing spring training. What we did is we went to the Grapefruit League. We tried to look at attracting teams from the Grapefruit League to Goodyear and not pull teams out of Tucson, for example. We actually sent out interest letters and marketing and phone calls and a lot of work that went with 13 teams in the Grapefruit League. We knew we weren't going to get the New York Yankees, the Boston Red Sox, etc., but we did target our approach. And as a result of that, or about the same time concurrent to that, we were looking at land in Goodyear, and our approach is to try and recruit a landowner that was willing to discount and or give land for this project, and in exchange, development rights in and around the area to try and bring this project forward. We had 3 submittals that were given to the city. You'll see those in green on this slide. One is I referred to as the old trotting track. That was one of the sites. The other site is where Cancer Treatment Center is now, and that's called EJM. And then the last one, of course, is a Wood family site where it ultimately went. In the green here, you'll see exactly where the 2 sites are. One is for the ballpark. Has anyone been to the ballpark yet? Has anyone not been to the ballpark yet? don't want to raise your hand for, because of the peer pressure, I think, going on. But anyway, the front, or the north green section, of course, is where the ballpark is. The remainder is where the development complexes are. You got we call it a spark of hope, and I see the mayor back there, and the mayor worked very closely on this. We actually took a team of us, including the mayor, some city staff, back to Cleveland, and with us we had a representative from JMI Sports and Rose Properties at the time. So we went back there and we visited with the Indians. We got the interest, and they were interested enough to actually say, or send their CFO and their attorney back here to look at this a lot more closely. So they came back out, visited with us, visited with council, and decided that this was a place where they wanted to be. Well, this was a long and arduous task. There were over 40 agreements for all the projects related to baseball, and virtually all of these went in front of council over a period of years. And one of the things, just memos of understanding, all that is just an agreement to enter into an agreement, but it spells out the deal points, if you will, of what the parties are going to do. But this was, again, over a many-year period of time, and this is just more illustrative to show the amount of time and effort, I think, that really went into this over a many-year period. This is a Cleveland Indians development complex. What you'll see in here, and you'll see 4 fields together. Those are, I would call them, or everyone calls those, the cloverleaf. But all these fields are used during spring training. During spring training, you actually have over 400 players, coaches, staff for each of the teams, so it does bring in quite a bit of activity. But the 4 cloverleaf fields, those are the ones that outside of spring training the city actually has rights to. So that's what we use. The other 2 fields you'll see off to the right, those are used only by the teams during the course of the year, throughout the year. They're always having training going on here. And what you see here is a big clubhouse. This is on about 47 acres of property. Each team is in between 45 and 50 acres. The ballpark, by comparison, is only about 5 acres, plus the parking fields around it. So this is our complex. It is, we have a lot of bragging rights. A lot of the teams have come out here to look at it, the Cubs, the Red Sox, others, Diamondbacks, and look at this as a model for the best way to train their players so they're successful during the baseball season. What you have, and I won't go into all the details, but the clubhouse itself is about 43,000 square feet. You'll see the number of fields there that they have. Batting cages, pitching mounds, on and on and on. So it's, again, very active right now. Goodyear Ballpark. That's a shot of the ballpark, and I'm looking out there and I see Nathan Torres, who's our ballpark manager. I'm sure Mike will refer to him when he gets up here. Regis Reed, if you could raise your hand back there. Regis was the owner's rep, if you will, for the construction of this entire project, both the ballpark itself and the development complexes. But this, as you're probably aware, 8,000 fixed seats. We have 1,600 that can go on the berm. We have additional areas called the terrace outside of right field. And we have the suites up above, certainly. The goal of Goodyear was to get 2 teams. We had an option on the second property for a second team. We were asked to wait a year, and I remember that was a very painful experience, but we were asked to wait to allow the White Sox to backfield down in Tucson as they were coming up to Glendale. But what had happened, we actually got approached by a team called the Reds. They were up here for Major League Baseball's owners meetings, and they came and met with the mayor and several of us to learn more about Goodyear. And I still remember the term they used, and that is we knocked their socks off. But we had a 75-day period of time whereby we had an exclusivity agreement. Things fell apart in Sarasota, Florida, for them. So during that 75 days, we had to get support from the governor's office, Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority, which I'll get to in just a second, financing, and certainly support of council, as well as the Reds during this period of time. It took us 71 days to actually get all of the obligations we needed for this to go forward. And not real different between this and the Indians, something is called parity in Cactus League. So the parity is that you're allowed so many fields, the clubhouse is X amount of square feet, et cetera. So you're always trying to be on par with what the other communities are doing for that portion that gets reimbursed by ASTA. If you go over and above that, then either the cities are on the hook or the teams are on the hook. The use agreement with the teams, what we have is 20-year agreements. They're called use agreements. They're very similar across different cities, but they have to play a minimum of 14 games during the season. Facilities are owned by the city. Teams don't own anything out there except for the furnitures and fixtures, equipment, and the players, which are pretty pricey. But we do own those. They rent those facilities for $100,000 a year, and that is subject to CPI, so it does increase slightly over time. We also have a capital replacement fund, and the capital replacement fund, and I'll go through the numbers in just a second, a little more clarity, but that is to fund any item. We're looking at the life expectancy of equipment out there, batting cages, screens, on and on and on that need to be replaced over time. So we set aside this fund to do that, so we didn't have to go back to council each and every year to try and secure funding and compete with other operational needs. So we think that that's going to work out pretty well up until about 2018, and that time at that point is we're building up this fund, we're spending it, and we'll actually be in a position where we'll be probably about $1 million where we'll have to sink back into this fund where the $250,000 does not cover. The revenue splits, and we don't make this up, this is again on par with what the other communities do, Surprise, Peoria, for example. But what happens is tickets are split 80%, 20%. Teams get 80%, city gets 20%. If the two teams are playing each other, they split their 80. We're always constant on that 20. Good news is that on the premium seating and on the suites, we get 100% of those revenues. And the revenues that we get from those surcharges goes towards that $250,000 replacement fund. You can see the rest of them on there, how we split up concessions, novelties, programs, et cetera. Naming rights, yes.
Question, Howard Broderick, Brian. Do you mean profit splits or do you mean revenue splits?
Revenue splits. Mike will go into a little more detail as far as how those are broken down.
The ticket sales are almost 100% profit, right?
Pardon me?
The ticket revenues are almost 100% profit. You just print tickets and mail them out, right?
Well, you have you do have ticket charges and Ticketmaster and some of those types of things, and Mike will go into a little more detail on that.
Okay, but when you talk about 50-50 concession, novelties, parking programs, then how do you subtract the costs out of that first before you split the revenues with the team?
And that's done at the end of the spring training season. Mike will go through that. We actually work with the teams, looking at all the expenses that happen during that spring training season, net out the expenses, and from that, then you have your settlement agreements.
Okay, so the actual agreement you have is that you split the profits by these splits.
Yeah, net of the expenses.
It's the net of expenses. Okay.
Correct.
And do the Indians and now the Reds? I assume the agreements you have with the Reds are the same.
Identical.
Okay. And do they have to agree to what the ticket prices are?
Yes. How that is the teams have to agree. They have consent rights to the pricing on the tickets. Now, in there, it says, "Thou shalt not, city, charge less than a dollar surcharge on tickets for the premium seats." They want us also to build this replacement fund. But they do have an ability to consent to the ticket prices, and we go through that each and every year with them. No real changes this year, for example, whether we go up or go down, but they are absolutely part of that.
How about when you do these specials and stuff that you have? They also have to, like I know you have midweek and you have, I don't know, I saw it in the newspaper, you advertise these different packages and stuff. They have to agree to all that as well?
That's correct.
Okay.
They do know what specials that are going on. For example, we had the YMCA that was that we had a fundraiser the other night. The teams actually name who the charity is, and those proceeds in this case went to the YMCA. And Mike will go into some of the more operational aspects.
Okay, and did you talked about this capital replacement fund, but I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you meant by that.
Sure. Capital replacement, and it is a spreadsheet, Nathan, I want to say there are probably about 40 items on there. And every one of those items, and working with the contractor, working with the teams that went through the arduous process of looking at the life expectancy of all these different items. And it projected, was it going to be at the ballpark, or was it going to be on the Reds complex or the Indians complex? When do we need to replace that, given the life expectancy? From that developed the rationale for how much money we had to set aside for that. And it was agreed upon with the teams to have it as $250,000.
So each year after you do what you're calling revenue splits, but it's really a revenue net of expenses split, then you have to put aside $250,000 out of your profits in addition to after that split, or does that get to count against your costs?
The $250,000 is actually part of the subsidy. Remember, we've talked about $2.4 million subsidy. I'll get to another slide that shows that, but that's included in these general fund subsidy. From that, all the revenues that we get, which are about, I want to say $1.2 million in revenues, and then we have our expenses. We have two things. Expenses minus the revenues is one number, plus this surcharge is included in there as well, to the point where we're at $2.4 million total. Mike will tell you that we're looking at reducing that down to $2.1 million for next year.
Okay, but again, I'm just on this replacement fund. Is there like I may have missed it, but is there a special amount you charge to collect that, or you just have to set that aside each year out of your profits?
Yeah, the surcharge, again, for premium seats.
Oh, that's where that goes.
Yeah, the premium seats is a surcharge that goes towards that. That is our revenue.
That goes to the capital replacement fund.
It goes towards the capital replacement fund. But, Mike will go through the splits, the actuals a little better that I think may illustrate that. The purpose of my going through this is looking at what the agreements are with the teams. But as you get into those details, Mike has those numbers to give you exact.
Okay.
All right?
Yep, thanks.
Sure. The capital budget for this, $108 million. You've heard that number. But cost of the Ballpark Indians Development Complex, you'll see, is at $60 million. The Reds Development Complex, $28 million. We had to acquire the land. We did it in two different takes, if you will. We ended up getting for the ballpark and parking fields and the Indians complex, and that was $6.2 million. And then we had an option for the Reds, which was about $3.8 million to bring that to 10. Plus, we did off-site infrastructure. Had to have roads to get to the ballpark and the development complex, the sewer lines, the water lines, those types of things. So that was the city's commitment toward this project.
Brian, was that the $10 million, the first $10 million, was that for the off-site improvements that the city sold GO bonds for?
I'm sorry?
The off-site improvements, water lines, sewer lines, roadway improvements, is that what the GO bond, the $10 million in GO and...
Yeah, the GO bonds were approved for a spring training project. The actual funds, I mean, and we also sold it, that we sold PIC bond financing as well. Technically, the GO bonds went directly to the ballpark development complex, not infrastructure, because it was for facilities for this project.
So it wasn't for anything specific?
No.
Okay.
You'll see we had three different sales. We had the GO bonds that were sold, the PIC bonds, and then finally the Reds complex bonds were sold in 2008. Now, this is to give you a summary of what the expenses are. What you have here is you'll have GO bonds on top. That, again, as you remember, GO bonds are paid for by the secondary property tax. That's about $800,000 a year for GO for the debt service. That's both principal and interest. On the PIC bonds, and for both series that we have there, those are interest only for the first 10 years. And then we start principal, and I'll get into that in a few minutes, but we do get into the principal portion of that, 2018 actually for the Reds, 2019 for the Indians. But as of now, the total debt service, you'll see, is $6.2 million, of which the PIC is $5.4 million of that. On the very bottom, you'll see the current subsidy, $2.4 million. Thanks to Mike, Nathan, staff, they are reducing that again down to $2.1 million, which he'll go through. Questions?
Yeah.
Brian, when this was presented to do this with these types of numbers, was it anticipated that the total subsidy, the $8.6 million, would come right out of the general fund operational revenue sources?
It's an excellent question, Larry. How it is we had the bond authority for $10 million GO, and then the rest was PIC. That was explained to council, knowing that it was general fund monies. And then a couple of reasons why you have to have the authority to sell the bonds. So hence the project wasn't entirely, not even close to being general obligation bond financed. But keep in mind that we had City Center that had bond authority. We had other projects that we were looking at down the road. So it was very specifically done with PIC financing for this project.
But I mean, the money to pay the deficit for the stadium, was it anticipated? Did council understand they were going to have to take that money right out of the general fund operating budget to do it?
Yes. But we also have an agreement, and I'll get into in just a minute, with what ASTA's portion. What I haven't hit yet, and I will be getting into, is ASTA's reimbursement to us, which was explained to council as well. Yes, Gary. Brian,
when would when would both bond sales be paid back according to the schedule? Is talking 2028, 2035, or where are we on
20 years for the bonds? Yes.
So 2028, we will own this stadium free and clear.
Yes.
And we will not owe any PIC bonds.
Yes. And then we'll be looking at trying to get renovation money from Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority after 20 years as well.
Still
20 years. It's tough to talk about doing renovations when you just open up the ballpark.
That's baseball.
But you have to look at long term.
Happened on La Mesa.
Scott Mikes here. Just on slide 16, or comparison between 15 and 16, maybe this is easier to understand. It doesn't make sense to me. If it cost $108.25 million, and then the bonds that you sold and stuff equals out to $112.4, can you maybe explain to me or why that is? Or I mean, we sold more than we needed.
That's correct. A little bit of the explanation is we had a retail, and we can get into a lot of detail on this, but the retail liner space was supposed to be acquired back from us for private development. That's the areas where the team shop is. If you look just to the left of the ticket office and to the right of the team shop, that's called retail liner space. City went ahead and built those, but when we went to sell the bonds, because that was going to end up being privately operated and owned, we could not use tax-exempt financing for that. So that's part of it. And I do know that when we, trying to remember all the different intricacies, but the actual cost of the project, you'll see here, there was a little bit more sold in excess for the PIC bonds. When we sold these PIC bonds, we also had, we ended up refinancing Interim City Hall, for example. We had some other debt that we married into that too. So when you look at the big picture, the true project cost, was the $108 million.
So, Howard Broadbeck, I want to go back to Larry's question that he had about slide 17, the $8.6 million, that council saw information that said money was going to come out of the general fund. Was the amount $8.6 million? I mean, obviously it had to be at least 6.2, but was the subsidy amount also expected to be 2.4?
Yes, this went in, again, 40 different agreements that we went through. And in explaining to council, it was explained we were using
And some of the terms we used, for example, back then were revolving fund, and that's general fund revenues that went towards this. But it was known that this was going to be PIC financed, or Public Improvement Corporation, which was a pledge against your excise tax.
Yeah, and that it also would be operated at a deficit of about $2.5 million a year to start, and maybe something else going forward.
Two answers. There was $1.9 million originally for the Indians. When you went to the second team and had to bring on additional staff, and Mike will go through the numbers it takes to actually maintain those facilities, it amped up to $2.5 million. And that's a budget number that we used with council, 2.5. Again, we're trying to drive that down to $2.1 million. Okay, this, and if you want this, we can certainly get you a handout. Kim has copies of it. But this is just to show you real quickly, Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority. They get money, Prop 302, we voted on. The Cardinals were part of that. That's the Arizona Cardinals. And Texas, the Royals and Rangers, and Surprise, Youth Sports, Tourism, this all went into Prop 302. So this is their funding. You'll see the red box goes to Cactus League. They anticipated that $205 million would be generated between hotel tax and rental car tax as a result of this proposition that we all passed. Well, I don't know if you voted for it or not, but it did pass. And as to Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority, they actually have different funding priorities with that red box, if you will. I don't want to get too much into the details, but ASDA has two different pots of money. They have their own generated by the car rental tax, and they have revenues generated by a hotel tax. Maricopa County, the Board of Supervisors, had what they call stadium district tax as well. That's part of that rental car tax. They abdicated their control of that, gave it to ASDA, said, and by the way, use your ASDA money and use our stadium district money that we, because you know how to spend it better than us. So when ASDA does their projections, they look at both tax generators as a result of Prop 302 as well as the car rental tax coming from the county through the stadium district. And not to bore you too much, but that was done in the early 90s to fund the Peoria Sports Complex and more. Priority 1 you'll see on there, those are the bonds that are already been sold out there for renovations. And Glendale and Goodyear were part of those original agreements. We, meaning Goodyear, the Indians and the ballpark, are going to be reimbursed to us at 50%. We are a one-team complex, so ASDA said we'll only reimburse you 50%. When we got the Reds complex, they bumped that up to the two-thirds, up to two-thirds. But for priority 1, that's a 50% reimbursement to us.
What does that? I don't understand what that means. What does that mean? Gary just said that the bonds are going to be paid off in 2028.
Right.
So sometime after the bonds are paid off, we're going to be reimbursed for something. What are we going to be reimbursed for?
Yeah, actually, Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority, we have an intergovernmental agreement with them, and what that will do is the taxes that they collect, and remember the red box for the Cactus League, we will be receiving 50% of the approved project cost for the Indians. Project cost was $74.5 million that they approved, said, you know, this is a maximum amount we'll do. So divided by half, or 50%, they're looking at reimbursing us $37.75 million.
And they'll do that all in 2031?
Actually, what it was, we have 4 different projections from them. 4 different projections. In 2006, they looked at their annual growth rates on these taxes, rental car, hotel. Yeah. We're going to grow at 1%. They were actually getting 7 and 8% annual growth rates. So as a result of that, said, hey, we have an ability to fund additional projects, Glendale, Goodyear, for example. They increased their estimated growth rates to 3.6%, and then finally in December 2008, it dropped about 3% all the way down to 2.5% over this period of time. ASDA sunsets in 2031. ASDA collects funds now. ASDA estimated that we would be starting to get our reimbursements in 2017. We get 5% interest annually on the money that they owe us. So on the $37.75 million, ballpark Indians, We were actually looking at getting about $74 million from them when you throw the interest component in there. All of that was expected to be paid back to us by 2028, prior to their sunset at 2031. That's the good news. I'll get into the bad news in a minute.
Think of it, in a layman's terms, think of these ASTA agreements as first, second, third, and fourth mortgages on some property. And Goodyear has a first mortgage, a second mortgage, and a fourth mortgage. And if the guy can pay it, eventually we might get the money. That's pretty much to
that
boil it
point,
in a nutshell.
ASTA does not go into debt. ASTA pledges its revenues that they get through the taxes. They pledge those revenues back to the cities. We, though, have to go out there and do the entire debt financing. There are no guarantees from ASTA. You go off the projections that you think you're going to get, and I'm almost done, by the way, but I'll go through that just real quickly. Priority 2, it's important to point this out. ASTA, again, it's a 30-year life. We said you need to go away at 2031. If all their obligations are paid off priority 1, and that includes a renovation for Maryville in 2012, that includes the renovations of Peoria in 2014, that includes the Cubs in 2016, although they're trying to do some things now. And then also, let's see, I believe that we have Oakland Athletics in there as well. And then Surprise, they opened in 2002, but every 20 years you need to renovate because you have 20-year agreements with the teams. For you to keep that team there, and we have 2 5-year options, most of us cities have that, you have to do renovations to keep them there, for them to go in and do additional leasing of facilities beyond the 20 years. So there are renovations expected to upgrade the facilities. The teams don't care as much about the ballpark. They care about their 45 acres where they train their players. So all these things enter into that. So when you get to priority 2, that's when all these other things are done. The renovation projects, they will amp our reimbursement up from the Indians from a 50% reimbursement to 2/3, as well as throw the Reds project into that. Priority 3, that's after 2031. That's the Maricopa County Stadium District funds. And priority 4, that's assuming something happens to ASTA. And I would tell you something does have to happen to the Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority. For the health of the Cactus League that generates $350 million a year to the economy in Arizona, there needs to be some longer-term strategies to fund the renovations of the facilities and perhaps even bring in new ones. We have 15 teams in Arizona now. Back in the early 90s, we had 6 teams, so you'll see that we have had a lot of growth as it relates to this. So what this priority 4 is, we all know something has to happen, and when that does, we'll get hopefully reimbursed much more quickly. This is the projections that they had. I went through that real briefly, the growth projections that they have. Just February of this year, they went through another revenue projection. And what they did is that there is no growth. In fact, it's negative. And we don't think that we are going to even factor in growth until 2012. And then it starts off slowly. So as a result of that, even though they project their growth between 2.5 and 10% over the years, the result of that is, you jump right to it. This is for the ballpark and the Indians. Don't even count the Reds at this point. We're looking at the original many estimates that they gave us. The last ones we went off of in December 2008 thought we were going to get $74 million. Remember, that was $37.75 million plus 5% annual growth rates. So we assumed from their projections that's how much reimbursements we would get. In this last reimbursement update of February of this year, they have dropped that to $43 million between now and 2031, which gives us a difference of $31 million less that we look at receiving. Now, that's based on fairly conservative projections, but who knows? I mean, it's rolling the dice. It's going to change each year. It's going to change each and every time they try and come up with new projections. Now, one of the things to point out.
Sorry, but is it And again, I didn't try to understand everything on slide 19, but is it possible they can just continue on spending new money and we really never get our money?
Contractually, our intergovernmental agreement with them, it has that they will reimburse Glendale, it will reimburse Goodyear part of the Priority 1 funding, and it will do some of the renovations I talked about. The renovations I talked about, again, Maryvale and some of these others, it's about $45 million that they have listed total for the Cubs, Surprise, etc. You add up all the renovations between now and 2022, they actually have dollar amounts in there.
Right.
For them to change that would require board action. I would presume they wouldn't. I would presume that we would be whole on that. I would presume that we would have a very good case if they changed that. So I don't really see that changing in terms of their commitment because we're in the Priority 1. What could change, though, is you get to the Priority 2s and 4s. Priority 2 is a little more nebulous. Priority 2s has renovations that occur after 2022 without dollar amounts.
Yeah.
That's the part that would concern me.
Okay.
And when we were looking at receiving funds from them in 2017, which is now moved up to 2021 before we start receiving anything, we will be looking at between $10 and $11 million of debt service requirements. We start principal payments on top of the interest 2018 for the Reds, 2019 for the Indians. So at that point, we're going to vary between $10 and $11 million for a few-year period there. And if revenue projections don't change with Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority, the city has that obligation. Any other questions?
I just want to make a comment.
Sure.
This is by far, in whatever how many weeks we've done, 9 weeks, probably the most complicated subject that we've dealt with, and I would say this is the most understandable presentation that I've seen, and really gets at the things that we'd be interested more than anything else we've seen, maybe with the exception of the fire chief. But this was excellent job.
Thank you.
Did you do this yourself, or you had somebody else do this for you? Who gets all the credit?
Kim Bradford, who is right here, obviously had a big part of that. She's my management assistant, and she does phenomenal work. But we work closely together.
Nice
and I
job
was
with a
blessed
very
to be the
complicated-
project executive on this for a number of years. So,
So you've lived it for a long time.
Lived it, breathed it. But
That's a
the
baseball
person living
bat,
and breathing now is Mike Svets, because I have to go back on life support, and he'll be up here to close.
Howard, I hope I can follow that, but I'll do my best.
I don't know. You still don't have your Miami tie on, so.
I don't have my Miami tie, but I did go baseball theme, so I'm okay there, hopefully. Very quickly, just to kind of summarize where Brian left off and where we begin, this kind of dives into the operations, and I'll try and set it up very similarly to how we went through Parks and Recreation a couple of weeks ago. We'll go through staff overview, maintenance functions, operations functions, dive into the budget a little bit, do some performance measures as it relates to spring training revenues, and then also talk about the non-spring training events, which in talking with some of you offline, obviously that's a huge interest in how to activate the area outside of spring training, and then also deal with efficiencies and opportunities. I think it's very important to note that this operation is very much a fledgling operation. The Indians arrived in September of 2008. The ballpark opened February of 2009. The Reds came in the fall of 2009, and we are in the middle of our first spring training, 31 games in 30 days. So with that said, when we dive into the budget, which will be about halfway through the presentation, please note that we will not have a full 12-month operation budget detail until June 30th of 2011. Come July 1st through June 30th will be the first time that we have all facilities online, all staff online, kind of working together to make the operation as efficient as possible in an effort to maximize revenue and minimize expense. dive through it real quick. Ballpark org chart, very similar setup to the Parks and Rec. We have a ballpark manager, you have an operations side, and you have a maintenance side. The blue that you see on there is not red, it's not yellow. It reflects the fact that we actually lost our head groundskeeper. He went to greener pastures in Oklahoma on February 19th of this year.
Is that a ballpark pun? He went to greener pastures?
He called it greener pastures in Oklahoma, but I guess we kind of have to refer to Rorik on that one since he's from Oklahoma. Anyway, that is blue because it's vacant. We've obviously had to move somebody into an acting role, and so we are down one position on the maintenance operations side of things. Just to kind of give you a sense of where we're at with our ballpark staff, these are some of our key professional staff. Nathan Torres is here. Nathan has 15 years experience and has done the last 13 on ballpark ops. He came to us from Peoria. Debbie Davini, 14 years experience. She's our operations manager, but is very, very gifted when it comes to advertising, marketing, and in-house graphic and marketing and pushing things out. She's been in baseball ops for 4 years. Scott Dobbins came to us from the Maryville facility, 13 years. Leslie Burke has worked in ticket operations for 8 years, all on the both professional sports side, and came to us actually from the Glendale facility. She worked for the Dodgers and the White Sox there. We were fortunate enough to have her come to us. Amanda Broadway is our revenue development coordinator. We touched on that quite a bit last time in terms of alternative sources of revenue. Amanda is key to bringing that in. And she's been with us since November of 2009. She worked in minor league baseball in Florida and most recently with the PGA. And like she said, I'll just give you a little caveat. She said she got out before the whole Tiger Woods fiasco and saw opportunity here with us. And Mark Kimball, 21 years of event experience, and he actually worked in the recreation division. We saw an opportunity for efficiency. Instead of hiring two very like positions, having one on the ballpark, one on recreation, we transferred Mark from recreation to the ballpark in May of last year. Brian kind of went through the complex overview, but this kind of gives you a sense of everything that has to be maintained. 108-acre site, 54 of that is turf, 12 of that is right-of-way landscaped acres, and the remainder, about 42 acres, makes up hardscape, concourse facilities, and so on and so forth. These facilities, and I will tell you this, the Goodyear complex has more facilities to maintain, whether it's ball fields, agility fields, than any other facility in the Cactus League. And I'll show you a comparison of that as we get down into it. The work that's performed, again, this kind of dives similar to what we did with the Parks and Rec divisions. The key note here is Major League Baseball standards. This is not neighborhood parks. These are not community parks. It is detail, detail, detail. And there is an expectation and a Major League Baseball standard that we have to meet each and every day. And through the trials and tribulations over the last 6 months, 12 months, we feel like we are on our road to meeting the expectations of the teams day in and day out. Very other similarities in terms of park maintenance. Again, I liken this to, you could say that parks and rec, parks and ballpark maintenance do have very similar functions, and they do. But I think I pointed out last time, we have neighborhood crews, we have community park crews, neighborhood park crews, community park crews. This is a Major League Baseball operation, so we have a Major League Baseball operation crew. And those are all of the different functions that they perform. Again, an overview of the site kind of gives you a a real sense of what it looks like from above and what the maintenance operation is very much in charge of and dealing with on a 365-day, 7-day-a-week operation. Breakdown of maintenance staff, 7 for the Indians Development Complex, 7 for the Reds, 2 dedicated to the ballpark, and 2 currently in the administration, and one of those includes a mechanic. Any questions on ballpark maintenance operations before I go further? The operations division, without the maintenance and without the facilities, operations doesn't exist. They really work hand in hand. 2 focuses: spring training, non-spring training. Again, maximize revenue, minimize expense. These are the major core services that are provided by the operations: ticket office, marketing, concessions, novelty sales, parking, game day ops, traffic management, advertising, sponsorship, sales, and facility rentals. It's a very in-depth operation, very much tied back to the contract that Brian spoke to, and the city has a major responsibility in every one of these areas, both during spring training and outside of spring training. Ballpark operations staffing, again, 6 folks, 1 facility event coordinator, 1 revenue development coordinator, 1 box office coordinator, and 1 administration. These folks, or 3 on the administration side, these folks work year-round. You have about a 4 or 5 month lead time in terms of really cranking towards spring training, a good 2 months of spring training in terms of really getting everything set up and activating spring training. You have a 2 to 3 month post-spring training evaluation, and then you kind of start transitioning to the next year. All of this is going on while we at the same time are trying to identify alternative sources of revenue and facility event operations outside of spring training. So the seasons very much overlap in terms of the work that is performed. This is a good ballpark division staffing comparison with other like facilities. You'll see that Goodyear has 25 full-time staff, 2 teams, Glendale 26, Surprise 27, Peoria has 20. The big note of difference there is that the Peoria does not have to maintain, they have no rectangular fields to maintain, no right-of-way to maintain. They contract out their ticket sales as well as some of their advertising sales. In Maryvale is a 1-team operation, and it has 14 full-time staff, and they don't even handle right-of-way ticket sales or advertising. The team does it. They're very heavy on the maintenance ops. Yes, Howard.
Oh, so go ahead. Mike, who does our suites?
I'm sorry?
Our suites. Who handles that? What area?
We do. That's all a part of the ticket operations and the sales, and it also ties back to sponsorship.
That's still Debbie?
Debbie handles that directly. If it has to do with the sponsorship, Amanda will handle that as well.
They were terrific last year.
And these facilities you have on here are all like Goodyear. They're all run by the local city.
Exactly.
Are there any that are run by the ball team?
No, yes. Off the top of my head, I can't. Nathan?
I think the A's are, they at least run it while they're here.
The Maryvale is the facility where the A's are, and they do handle a lot of the operations side.
No, that's
I'm sorry, that's the
Community.
Brewers.
That's okay. It's not that important.
There are a couple of facilities that share responsibilities, and the A's are one, and Phoenix, and the Brewers in Phoenix also. And that's it all comes down to their use agreements with the team.
Right.
So cities may be less involved, but then they're receiving less revenues as well because of that.
Real quick budget breakdown. Ballpark division is $3.9 million before the revenue offsets that Brian had referred to. If you broke this down by maintenance and ops, maintenance is approximately 56% of this, and the operations is 44%. Where I have depreciation, that is 6% of the budget, and that refers to the capital account that Brian discussed at length with you, the $250,000. And as Brian said, that $250,000 is funded directly through a revenue source regarding ticket surcharges and surcharges on premium seats.
Mike?
Yes.
Bill Stiff, the question I have about that is, Brian said that money is used for very specific, he said there was a list of 40 items or whatever. Could you throw a couple of examples of what might be on that list? Because I'm looking at, Brian used the term where we put that $250,000 aside so we don't have to compete with other city departments. So what are we funding with that we don't want to go into competition with everybody
HVAC, for example, is a system that will have a lifespan or a life cycle associated with it.
And it will in every city facility, though.
I'm sorry?
It will in every city facility.
Correct, but it is a facility that we have to maintain per our use agreement at a certain level. Right now we're dealing with, for example, a number of typical post-construction issues, whether it be leaks, whether it be HVAC, whether it be hot water supply issues. Irrigation systems is another one and very critical to our operation. And so those, the nuts and bolts, the things that make an operation work that we all kind of take for granted on a daily basis, those are the type of systems, and it's a huge comprehensive list of 40. Those are a couple examples.
Okay, thank you.
Revenue. These are the basic revenue breakdowns. Again, these are what was part of the FY10 approved budget. About $1.6 million on the spring training side of things, and $170,000 on the non-spring training side of things. One note of caveat, obviously spring training right now we're in the middle of, from a settlement standpoint, that usually takes place in the early part of May. I will tell you that on the non-spring training side of things, we are already at about $165,000, and we expect to exceed that goal for this coming fiscal year. Spring training, I'll try and get through this. Yes. Spring training, very quickly, a rundown. What I'm going to show you is 2009, one-team operation, Indians at Goodyear Ballpark. The comparison that I have up there is 2008 Indians in Winter Haven, Florida, just to give you a sense of comparison in terms of in terms of us dealing with the Indians. About 99,000 Goodyear attendance. Indians' banner year in Winter Haven was 2008, the year they came off of just missing going to the World Series. That was a 7% increase. Middle of the road in terms of attendance. A couple of caveats here. The teams that always draw the most in the Cactus League are the ones that you see at the top: the Cubs, Giants, Dodgers, Mariners, Diamondbacks. The Indians right in the middle of thick of things, and we're pretty pleased with that, given the fact that they were here in Arizona for the first year. Some ticket promotions. We are the most heavily promoted operation in spring training, and we work very, very closely with the teams to try to draw people to the ballpark. It's a new facility. The Indians and, of course, the Reds are not the Cubs and the Dodgers. They're not the Giants and the Mariners. And so we work very, very hard to try and develop ticket promotions and promotions throughout the season in accordance with the team to get people to the ballpark.
And at the end of the day, because of your splits, I mean, let's put this really simply, you don't really care how many tickets you sell. You care how many hot dogs people buy and parking that they pay once they get to the stadium, right?
We care about the ticket sales because of the facility surcharges and the premiums, and I'll show you the splits that break all of that out. But you are correct that residual revenue, that tangential revenue, the parking, the concessions, the novelties, where we have a 50-50 split is very, very important to us. So us getting people in the doors, getting fannies in the seats, is very, very critical to the operation.
Yeah, I noticed you had this, it's the blowout days that I saw in the newspaper somewhere, that it's half-price outfield box.
Correct.
And how difficult is it to get the teams to go along with something like that?
It hasn't been very difficult at all. The Indians and Reds, by nature, are organizations that have to do a lot of marketing in Ohio. It's a depressed economy, and they have been very, very supportive. Give you a small example in relation to the advertisement that you saw. We were just set to run that for 1 week. The Indians and the Reds, in cooperation and consensus with us, really wanted us to extend that for the second week of the Avondale School District spring break, as well as then going into the last week of the season where private schools are out the week before Easter. Simply stated, some revenue is better than no revenue.
Well, your total revenue is 3.9, and your ticket revenue is 1.6. So that means you're making 2.3 on everything else. You're making 60, 70% more on all the other stuff, and that's where you have a 50% split. So, I mean,
Exactly.
it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say you ought to convince the teams they should have a Goodyear residents are free day. In fact, you should be willing to pay the $2 to get the Goodyear residents in the door. If there's 3,000 seats available, park them in the seats, but they have to be there at 11 o'clock so that they buy a lot of hot dogs.
Nathan, you catch that?
Huh? 2-drink minimum, there you go. No coverage. You don't tell them they're going to pay $5 for parking when they get there.
And that's the fun part of the job in terms of being able to come up with all of those different types of marketings and promotions. There is obviously a bottom line that always has to be watched. Part of it has to do with making sure that we do have season ticket holders, and one of the things that we do have to be somewhat careful with is devaluing that season ticket holders full season package or half season package. So we are careful with that. We don't want to lose season ticket holders. Season ticket holders generate more season ticket holders. But you're absolutely right. Operations and the marketing and sponsorship side of things, advertising side of things definitely helps us, keeps us creative.
Hey, Mike, we had this opposite discussion the last time you were up here when I was saying you ought to raise the prices to the people who are using the softball fields. And now you just completely turned it around and said, no, I don't want to lower the
Well, the best way to say it is we don't get any other money if somebody comes to play softball. And more money if somebody comes to the ballpark. So, yes, it is a flip side in terms of looking at it from a business perspective. General spring training revenue, again, this is gross, 3.56 in 2009. The Indians, their banner year in Winter Haven, generated 2.4. Again, gross revenue, 1 million in Winter Haven. Concessions, 900,533. Novelties. Key note about the team shop, in going through design and construction, one of the key points was making sure that we had one top-notch, first-class team shop. It is by far the best team shop that is in the Cactus League. It has the most stuff, has the most room for people to move around. A lot of the other ones feel like you're walking into a walk-in closet in a bedroom. And I think the airiness, the openness, the size of it allows you to generate a lot more revenue associated with that team shop because you could put more merchandise in it. Parking revenue, 147, 130. Advertising revenue, 235, 850. The goal for advertising revenue was 200. And I think this is a significant point. There were 2 full-time employees on the operations side of things as of November of 2008 going into the 2009 spring training. Nathan and Debbie were the 2 operations. To be able to pull the operations together the way they needed to in a 2-person operation, and on top of it exceed advertising sales associated with that was phenomenal. What makes the significance of this operation so critical is we got the keys to the ballpark on February 6th. Our first spring training game was February 25th. So not only were we working at a different location and selling, you couldn't even show people the ballpark. It is a tremendous asset to have both Debbie and Nathan on staff. Real quick list of inaugural season sponsors. Net revenues after expenses. This is where we get into the splits. City took in $937,000. That is approximately 40% of the net revenue that was generated associated with spring training. You can see the revenue shares, surcharge, premium, and suites. We generate 100% of that revenue. And then the other splits, as Howard pointed out, are 50-50 with the exception of tickets.
So are you going to let Gary put his name on one of those suites for a big check or something?
Gary wants us to start selling PSLs.
No, you should only do it on premium and suites, because that's where you make 100%.
Can I have my name? Can I buy a bathroom? How about the men's room?
You want a stall or you're in the
stall? I want the GNC Railway above the men's room. You know.
Nathan, can you make note of that? We'll get in touch with Gary tomorrow. Okay, thank you. One important note of this is that there's $82,000 additional in sales tax just associated with the ballpark that's generated for the city. This does not include hotels, restaurants, bars, everything that's spent outside of the city. It generated an additional $82,000, and that was at the old sales tax rate. Volunteer utilization. This kind of points to an efficiency. $90,000 value, and we paid out $23,420. These were two groups, the White Tanks Rotary as well as the Pebble Creek Pickleballers. In fact, out of that, the two groups ended up giving us revenue back. The White Tanks Rotary did it in form of wheelchairs for guests that need that ride from the car, need that ride from the front gate or gate to their seat, as well as then the pickleballers gave us $5,000, which I think I mentioned last time went to fund our financial aid program on the recreation side of things.
This may be a question for Brian more than for you. With these Arizona Tourism Association future payments, you know how a lot of states, or I guess it was states, sold their tobacco tax ongoing revenue forward. They at a discounted amount when that occurred. Have you ever looked at selling that $70 million or $34 million or $47 million to an investor at a discounted amount and say, I'll take the money now and you take the risk for whether or not you collect it? Because it looks really complicated to me, and if somebody like you doesn't buy it, they might pay you more than what it's really worth. Or I mean, if today the Arizona is saying it's worth whatever you had on here, $40 million, maybe you could have an investor who'd be interested in paying $38 million for it.
Right.
Sorry, that was just a...
Oh, that's okay. Yes, sir. Marvin.
Mike, is this last year's operational or this year's? Can you explain what's going on this year?
This year, we did put an RFQ out for volunteer groups. We did not get any solicitations as we did last year. So this year, each and every volunteer that we have is done on an individual basis. They went through the HR system, background checked, and we brought them on. And so we've had to manage, instead of having a group leader manage a core group of volunteers for us, we've had to manage each and every volunteer this year.
Now, is that a full-paid city employee?
That's managing that?
Yes.
It is Mark Kimball. That is a portion of his job associated with that. The HR department, from a gathering of the applications and getting them to us and doing the background checks, does have a volunteer coordinator as well. That's a small portion of her job as well, because she works with a ton of groups throughout the city, like our Adopt a Park program, to help keep parks a little bit cleaner.
And you also indicated you were thinking of doing something different next year?
I think we're always looking to make the process more efficient and easier for us, while at the same time minimizing our expense. And so part of postseason evaluation will be, a portion of that will be is our volunteer program. Was it as good as we possibly can be? Is there something else we need to do differently? Do we need to do something that's somewhere in the middle of what we did in 09 versus 10? That's a part of the postseason evaluation that we will go through.
Okay. So in this current year, then you don't have that $23,420 expense.
Correct. We are spending $1.50 per game on a volunteer, and that is simply a food voucher that will be an expense back to us through our concessionaire. You're very welcome. Very quickly, Cactus League estimates from economic impact. It's important to note that 55% of the folks that attend Cactus League games are from out of the area, out of the state. Typically 2 people per party, and they typically will go to 2 to 3 games. If they're here for 3.5 nights, they spend $286 in the area. If they're here for 4.5 nights, which is an average 3.5 to 4.5, they'll spend $367 a day. So there is a tremendous impact economically in the for the Cactus League. The total spending, total economic impact associated with Goodyear's was approximately $11 million in 2009.
So are you saying that 45% of the attendees are basically from the Goodyear area?
They're from the Phoenix area.
From the Phoenix area.
Correct.
Do you know how many Goodyear residents attend?
We don't. We're able to track that, and that's part of what we will be able to do. First year of operation, the Indians ran the box office for us. Leslie didn't come on until July of 2009. Part of postseason evaluation is to go through every one of those transactions that we know we have data for. Somebody didn't walk up and just pay cash. And do an analysis of where folks came from. It helps us drive our advertising and marketing dollars, and that's part of the postseason, and that takes quite some time to data mine that information, put it into a package that makes sense, and then help to start developing the program for the following year. The Goodyear, for example, and I think it's important to note, Goodyear's population is, we're the smallest Cactus League city in the Cactus League. Peoria, surprise, approximately 33% larger than us. So to show the numbers that we showed in our first year, partly because the Indians were expected to win the Central Division last year. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Partly because of the novelty, but also simply the fact that we had a good facility that had great customer service, fantastic friendliness and cleanliness. Non-spring training. You guys can brainstorm on this. We're open to any and all suggestions. I know a lot of people have ideas. I've broken this down into kind of different times of the year. Weather does, of course, drive some of the ability for us to do non-spring training. April, May, a real quick snapshot of what we did. College President's Summit that the mayor held there. Green Day Goodyear, Phoenix Symphony are a couple of examples. Skyway Church did an Easter service there as well. During the summer, it obviously tapers down a little bit, but we did have a movie in the ballpark series. Cancer treatment centers did hold their directors retreat there. The 4th of July was held there, various city meetings, and we had the Rookie League. I think it's important to note that the teams have a presence year-round on those 2 fields, those agility fields, the gang mounds, the development complex, and whether it's extended spring training, Rookie League in the summer, the Fall League and the Instructional League in September, October, November, they are there year-round. On the September, October, November, a couple amazing stats to point out. You'll see where it lists the NABA tournament, National Amateur Baseball Association, and the MSBL. tournament. Those two tournaments, 5 straight weeks, all 9 fields, 4 games a day. 9 o'clock, 12 noon, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, generated for us approximately $75,000 in revenue. That comes out to about 1,200 games that were played by people that were in the Phoenix area in Goodyear. And hopefully they also spent some money in Goodyear in terms of hotels and restaurants and bars. But that is an impact that this facility can have. Had the Pebble Creek Car Show. AYSO had a soccer day. We started our city market, and so on and so forth. December through February, it does lighten up a little bit, only because there's a lot of maintenance going on in preparation for spring training, moving from Bermuda grass to the ryegrass system that is in place for spring training. In summary, 45 events at the ballpark. Again, keep in mind we did not have the Reds facility until September, and so this is just the ballpark and the Indians primarily. Days of community use, 119. Participation, 70,000. Revenue to date, 159, 164,000. On deck, Goodyear High School baseball showcase. Will you say the 3 high schools, Desert Edge, Millennium, and Estrella Foothills, will each host a game at the ballpark on April 14th. Pepsi pitch, hit, and run. 3 graduation ceremonies in May. Desert Edge, Millennium High School, as well as Estrella Community College. Movie Night Series, which is sponsored by the Goddard School. Little League, we're going to put Little League in that ballpark and give those kids an opportunity to run around on a major league field. We figured out that it can work with the bases and everything, so it's going to be a huge community asset just from an experience standpoint to see 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds running around those fields, and we're going to really look to utilize that as much as possible. Baseball tournaments, 4th of July. Real quick, some efficiencies. Reclaimed water saves us about $2 for every 1,000 gallons that we utilize. It does come with its drawbacks, but since we use about 150 million gallons of water for irrigation and other things, it's pretty significant for us. We have had to install a water injector system, which basically allows us to reduce the salt content that's in the water. Salt and grass, anybody who's ever from the Midwest have ever seen that, do not mix and create a whole bunch of hazards for us when it comes to managing turf. Player transportation contract. We're responsible for transporting the teams from the development complexes to the stadium or to the ballpark on game days. We've locked in a 10-year contract and have, in such, been able to reduce our annual costs associated with that by about $20,000. The things I have in highlight are very much things that are a work in progress. Utilization of volunteers, part-time employees, looking at possibly taking over the cleaning service during, before, and after games. We currently have moved in the direction of taking it over during the games. Saves us about $4 per hour for every employee that's there. Social networking, Facebook, Twitter. Non-traditional revenue for radio. We basically trade out tickets for advertising. To Howard's point, free tickets. We're only getting 20%, but we'll be able to get that 50% split on everything else they spend. Nonprofit suite donation. City sends out a solicitation, identifies nonprofit groups. They get the suite for free, and they can use that as a fundraiser to support their efforts. Goodyear in Action Junior Achievement are a couple of those that are coming up next week. Internship programs, revenue development coordinator, execution of those service agreements with Ovations and Ticketmaster and Coke have not only provided us capital assets free of charge, they provide us ongoing operational savings, not having to pay for data lines. For example, with Ticketmaster, it saves us about $3,000 a year. Coke, Ovations have all put in significant capital investments into the facility. Ovations is our concessionaire. $1.3 million in all of the equipment that went into the concession stands that did not cost the city a dime. In-house advertising, parking lots used as multipurpose fields, non-traditional ballpark events. Questions, concerns, comments, suggestions? Yes, Al?
You use Pepsi, right? And Coke?
Coke.
Because I see Pepsi in slide 57. But that's hidden.
The Indians wanted Pepsi, but we
The
went
Indians
with
want Pepsi, okay.
Yes, Al?
So does the P&L for this operation basically comes to you?
Correct.
You're the person. Are you on any kind of bonus program for what you do with the P&L?
Nathan and I, nor Debbie, are not on a bonus program. It is.
Well, this to me is just a straight P&L business.
It is.
And I think the city should consider taking someone with talent, which you appear to have, and put you on a bonus program that says, okay, if you get this to a $2.1 million loss or a $2 million loss or something, you get a percentage of that to give you the right incentive to do all these right things.
I think I'd have to give Nathan 90% of that, but I.
Well, then put Nathan on a bonus program. But to me, this is definitely a.
It is. It's a straight up business operation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mike, could you update us where we are this year? I know we're two-thirds of the way through. Where are we in attendance against projections?
It has been a not great year. Cactus League is down a little bit, but we are down. I will just say this. Money follows winning professional sports teams. And the Indians, if I'm not mistaken, are picked to be dead last in all of Major League Baseball, and the Reds are not far behind them.
The Reds got a good rating. Reds got a good rating recently, I heard.
Did they?
For the playoffs, yeah.
The Indians were also picked to win the Central Division last year and lost 97 games, and it proceeded this trade away.
It never stopped Bill Veeck.
I'm sorry?
It never stopped Bill Veeck.
Bill Veeck. It didn't.
You're the Bill Veeck of Goodyear.
Well, we're trying. If you go back to those promotional pages, if we came back next year, we'll probably have 3 or 4 pages of that to share with you. Gary, we won't have all of the numbers by the until the first part of May in terms of finalizing everything.
Have you considered bringing a pig in to bring the balls out to the umpire like they do up in Minnesota? And then barbecue the pig at the end of the season.
Oh, brother! What a goat!
Have we gone that far? No, but I will put that right in line with making sure we name that stall.
Bill Veeck Jr. does it up for the St. Paul minor league team, and we should think about a pig roast.
There are obviously a ton of opportunities from a promotional standpoint. You're right, that Minnesota minor league baseball team has probably followed that lead that Bill Veeck had set up back in the 40s and 50s.
They brought Darryl Strawberry back for a season.
They also had Dime Beer Night in Cleveland, which didn't go over very well. Yes, sir.
Barry Hamp, can you tell us a little bit about the development plans around the stadium and around those grounds?
The only thing I can tell you right now is, there are some property holders there. Sun MP is a major property holder, both north, east, and south of the ballpark. But a lot of the ballpark development is really tied up in litigation right now. Can't kind of dive into a lot of those details. I think you've read the newspaper articles over the years, but right now, for example, Sun MP is not looking to develop that property. They have actually planted it with crops in order to probably gain some sort of tax advantage by using it as ag land. Economic development would probably be able to handle that question better than I would. But to the best of my knowledge, there are no immediate plans for development around the property. Yes, sir.
Have they done something about the signage in the parking lot? Because I have occasionally, last year, for instance, gotten lost each and every time.
I think what we have done, and it's part of the efficiency, consistency with officers, consistency with parking and parking attendants has helped. be able to simplify that a little bit. We have not added a bunch of signs at this point, simply because those fields are not just used as parking lots, they're used as multi-purpose fields as well. And too much verbiage on a sign, as anybody knows, just kind of confuses.
No, but like A section, that kind of thing, because when you come in early, everything looks different from when you come out.
Oh, absolutely.
Particularly after a few beers.
Absolutely. If you get there early, you pretty much have a prime parking spot. It makes that $5 worth it. Howard, you had a question? Anything?
No, I was going to mention you have 13 palm trees in your outfield. You know that.
13 palm trees?
Yeah. Is there a reason for that? Or? I mean, I would think a team wouldn't really want 13 palm trees in their outfield.
Actually, I think we have 12 now. We just had to take one down.
In case it dies.
We'll replace it, but that's where we were at. Yes, sir.
Very good.
I have one question. I was talking with the people dealing with the prize field up there, and your USAA Winter National Tournament, is that the same one that they hold up there?
Yes, it is. It's a regional tournament. If I'm not mistaken, somewhere between those 2 or 3 tournaments, there ends up being upwards of 500 teams that come into the area. So yes, they'll use Surprise, they'll use Goodyear, they'll use a couple of other ballparks as well. If you figure that we're holding 36 games a day over the course of all of those fields, you end up with 72 of those teams playing at Goodyear on any given day.
And that's the 2-week tournament that goes right after Christmas, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Charles Rothbecker. Have you thought of using the Major League example of security in your ballpark?
That is...
As D-backs, use security instead of police. I figured you save about $60,000 a season by using security over police officers and those, like in the benches and that kind of stuff.
It is not something that we have formally looked at. I think as a city, as we go forward, any efficiency to the operation is obviously going to be welcome in terms of saving dollars.
Because you really don't need, a weapon in the bench, because somebody gets on the field, you're not going to shoot them. You just have to have a good security guard be able to get them, just like the D-backs do.
Understood.
Yeah.
Yes, Al.
One last question. Living in Estrella, the left turn coming out is a challenge from the ballpark. Has that been worked on? Because they ask you to go north, and then you got a UE to come back.
We do have the, with the traffic signals now in place, that has obviously improved. That last year, 2009, those traffic signals were not in place. Did require more police officers in order to manage that traffic. Any other questions, concerns, comments, suggestions?
Great
Thank you.
presentation,
Thanks.
Mike.
Very good, Mike.
Very nice.
Very good.
Thank you. Brian, thank you.
Joan, the question that you were going to pose at this point.
Yeah. So I would like to make a motion that Mike Kiak work with Dick Bowers. I was going to have him independent, but write up the conclusion of our recommendations from our committee to be presented to City Council.
Is that okay with you, Mike?
Yeah, let me just say for what it's worth. It can be any one of us. Okay? It doesn't have to be me. But I know I've talked to many of the different committee members over the course of the last couple of weeks, and I'm very much concerned that I want to make sure that the voice of the committee ends up being represented as a part of the final product. Don't misunderstand the message, and I certainly don't want to question anybody's point of view on this, but I just want to make sure, and I've expressed to some of the members of the committee, that I want to make sure that our voice is heard, and that the intent of what we wanted to try to get across as a committee doesn't get somehow lost in a translation. So I'm just looking for just some sort of fair and balanced approach relative to making sure when it comes time to preparing that and potentially delivering that final presentation, that the committee's voice is heard. That's my only interest.
I would consider that an asset and a value to the work that I'm doing at this point forward. So that we have a motion for that.
I'll second the motion. Just
give a second for that. Any discussion, please?
Oh, I won't vote.
Any other discussion?
I want to ask on the final product, Gary Gelser, on the final product, you're going to take the 90 or so suggestions that have come up for revenue enhancement and cuts and things of that nature, and you're going to boil them down to, because there's duplication,
right?
And you're going to boil them down to a solid 10 to 15, and you and Mike are going to try to get the wording so that the committee's voice is really heard in that. Is that what is that the thrust of where we're going with Mike working with you on?
Basically, but let me just run through it if I could.
Okay.
So at this point forward, with one more piece of information to be added next week. After that, it's simply a matter of you expressing your priorities and us writing it up in a cogent manner. My suggestion is, and you've got a number of things that I'm going to encourage you to go back and just scan through the week. And I apologize to Howard, but let me tell you what I apologized to him for earlier. On the 11th, after the last meeting, he sent me a list of 12 points that he felt were a summation of the input that it went around, and they were very good. They'll be posted in 4 others.
Not exactly. It was the 12 things that were mentioned more than once. And then there were 8 things that were mentioned only once, I think, is what it was.
There was 4 mentioned. Well, you had 4 other things. But at any rate, I will post that tomorrow. It simply was a slip-up. I thought it was attached to the other materials. So that'll be in there tomorrow. But here's the process that we had talked about early on. And again, it's ultimately up to you. A couple things would occur. You have information that includes the brainstorming session, stuff that was up here that we printed up for you. That was fundamentally about revenues, but there's also a lot of things collected over time about revenue generation. There were the personal submittals, the things you submitted in writing, which were summarized and given back to you in 19 categories as a starting point to try to lay those out in a logical manner. There were the question and answers that are posted every week. That just a whole ton of stuff, but it's at least something that has to be read and considered to see what's in there that needs to be drawn out. You had the committee go-round on the 10th, where you each shared, or on the 3rd, on the 10th, where you each shared things. And so my suggestion, well, a couple of things. Conclusion is that whatever's presented has to not leave anybody out. So all of the individual submittals will be included as an addendum to the submittal to the council. I think that's just an imperative. So there's no voice unheard. Even if it's a voice that's all alone, it's heard because it would be attached. I would suggest that, Mike, if you and I could get together tonight for just a little bit.
Assuming that everybody agrees.
Well,
we haven't voted
if this goes forward in the manner that it appears that it will, to get together and see if there's some way to boil this down to maybe it's 30. Maybe it's 30 points. And then next week to use our option finder, our voting mechanism, to get those down to something rather than to presume a top 15. I think to presume a number like this and let you folks make the determination to get that down to a more digestible size. That would be my suggestion. That we can then do that in fairly short order using the turning point system. And then from that point, with that data, we can then concentrate on how to construct a report. Yes?
Is there a way of once we boil these suggestions down to 15, is there a way that we can rank them?
Absolutely.
So that the committee on 60% of the committee thinks this suggestion is a highest priority. So that I think that's what council is looking for. I mean, if you're going to say we're going to take bulk trash and go to once a month, or we're going to say the committee thinks electronic billboards is a great thing.
My suggestion would be, and when we get it down to, say, 15, is that we post them up here and we do sort of the oldest but still very effective tool in these sorts of things, is give everybody 5 dots. And in other words, 5 votes, or a larger number if we want, but 5 works. And I always do it with 4 one color and 1 red. Then the red becomes the thing that is absolutely, to you, the most important. But ultimately,
the question comes up, can you put all 5 on one thing?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a weighted ballot.
Absolutely.
It always became an argument whenever I was
No,
involved.
it almost has to be, or you lose your ability to have a strong position. So I would suggest in the 15, and then out of that again. But we have to bring back to you a draft that Mike and I would work on for you to dialogue and ultimately say you would put your signature to that as representative of the consensus of the group and respectful of you as an individual. So if that's okay with you, it's a pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but voluminous kind of process to go through.
Are we going to vote on this now?
Well, we're still in the conversation component of it.
How are we going to, and maybe we don't care at this point, the folks that aren't here, that have been here sporadic, I mean, that have attended? I mean, we've got several that just haven't been here at all.
Right.
But we also have some, and I'm thinking specifically of Monica and a couple of others, Rain, that have been here but aren't here tonight, may not be here next week or the week after. How do we envision that going down, making this a true committee statement?
They only get 2 dots.
Can we appoint a proxy for us if we're not going to be here?
We're not in a position to do that. We were not appointed by ourselves. We were appointed by others. Now, if you wanted to petition the council to ask about that, that would be one thing, but there is no structure. Just as if someone drops off, and we've had one person who advised me that person was ill, and another person who's taken a job that precludes them from being here. But those aren't replaced. For one, they'd be 8-9 weeks behind the data.
Well, look, I've been here.
Chronically place your dots.
I don't know. But I know that the good thing about that little process is it's very visual when it's done. It's very visual. But let's think about that. Maybe this system allows us to do that. Yes.
I have been here every meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
Unfortunately, I have a condo that's closing up in Washington State, and I won't be here next meeting or the next meeting. I'll be here on the 14th. So if I want to vote. So how can I do that?
Well, I will contact everybody now, if any of you can't be here for those nights, let me know. I will contact the people that are not here, as I've done before with the ones who missed like everything. And we'll find a way to make that happen. Now, a couple of possibilities.
You can email me.
Yes, we can do it electronically. We could probably hook you up by voice.
Okay.
But let's see what will work out, because you've put a lot of time and energy into this. We'll do everything I can to make sure that it doesn't impact your ability to conclude it.
I appreciate it.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. We had a little bit of conversation on it. All in favor of the proposal that Mike and I worked together on this?
Are we
Aye.
doing-
No, just
Oh,
hands,
okay.
I think. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Was that a no opposed?
Yeah.
Okay, so it passes with a strong majority. And if you've got a few minutes. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Well, I do. I attended the workshop this last Monday and for the city council, and I would suggest that everyone that we have invested so much time, that is in our best interest to go to the website and watch the video for the city council work session. Not so much the city council regulars meeting, but the city council work session, because there they express the desires sort of what they want to do. Like, I'm not into cutting salaries, I'm not into furloughs, I'm not interested in doing this and doing that. And I think it's every one of us need to listen to what city council is saying and what our city manager is saying on that. That is a critical part of it. Then when we come back to our work session, we have a kind of a wider, that doesn't mean it's going to change our mind. And that doesn't mean it's anything different. But that just tells you what their feelings are. And secondly, is you sent out the information on the questions. That I didn't ask this question, but it says, how does the size of the IT department, city manager's office, and the mayor and city council office compare to other cities? There's only one city in there that we are compared to that is ours, close to our size, and that's smaller, and that's Buckeye. But every other city in there is huge. Surprise is 88,000 and people, but Chandler's compared to that is 230,000.
What is it that you'd like?
Well, I think it should be compared to cities our own size, like Lake Havasu, Surprise, Flagstaff, other things. I mean, this gives an unreal picture.
That's doable, but just let me share, being an expert in city manager offices, that they're never going to line up. Sometimes I had 30 people in the office under my budget. It is not consistent, and it moves in and out, and it depends on the circumstances. Sometimes it's up, sometimes they just don't compare well across cities, Gary.
Gary Gilzer, I want to, for a change, I'm going to agree with one thing that Joan said. I really encourage everybody to go to the website and watch the work session on the city budget that was presented this last Monday, and listen to the council members on what, those are your elected representatives, and those are the people who are going to make the ultimate decisions, and listen to what they had to say. And I agree with Joan. She went too far when she started banging on the city manager's office. City manager's office carries a lot of excess baggage that hasn't been distributed to other departments. And as Dick said, a lot of times that person who is an essential person for city government has been shed by some other department. Where does it reside? In that person's purvey. And we still want to have that job done, except it doesn't really fit in any other department. So where does it go? It got dumped. And that's why, so as Dick said, you can compare lots of different city managers' offices and say, well, we're overstaffed. But then start looking at all the other departments and see and listen and look at every function of every person that works for the city manager and see if they really support the city manager or they're doing something else for the city and they're just in that office because that's the best place to stick them organizationally at this time.
It is a catch-all.
Catch-all department.
Anything else, folks, for the good of the order? Can I make sure I've got the questions that you've asked? You want a copy of Larry's work that was presented regarding the run rate and the second half additions, including sort of the lumps, right, in the first and second half. You wanted the fire service in 09-10 numbers. Why are they up 1.7 million? Just to confirm that. The slide 10 and 7 at 47 million to 52 difference. What is that difference, and explain it out so we can all understand that and reconcile the two. Is it really 13 million that we have in the balance? I think we need to probably visit that again just to make sure everybody understands why it's not. And ballpark questions, I think you've got those answered, but you had some suggestions and you wanted information from economic development. We'll try to get that on the development of the area adjacent to the ballpark. Is there anything I've missed from tonight that you expect to hear back from and post it online? Thank you very much, folks. Yes, sir.
Just one of the questions that we got tonight is a question that I asked, and it was not exactly the answer to the question. Do you want that sent to you, or do you want to address it?
If you can just, if you wouldn't mind sending it to me rather than because I probably have to go back into the system to check it. Please do that.
I'll do that. Thank you.
And anything you want. Okay. Peace. Have a nice week.